Hello, let me know where you're from in the world and what time it is after liking this video. The previous tenant left a survival guide. Never take the sunlight for granted. Derek and I stared at Ellie in silence. It wasn't a stare of horror, more of sheer disbelief. I couldn't be more grateful that she had saved our lives. What remained of Albert on the floor wasn't a source of alarm. Despite his extended life, she had ripped him into enough pieces that if he had survived, he couldn't speak and must have been in unbelievable pain. Just like the residents he tortured for years. It would have been a cruel irony, and I almost half hoped he hadn't truly died, as sick as that may sound. "Are you okay?" I asked Ellie. She had shrunken and morphed back into a smaller demonic child, something that I felt a need to protect, despite the fact she didn't need anyone to do so. "I'm fine," she answered, head still hung as if she were ashamed. There was a pause for a moment. "Thank you, sweetheart. We'd all be dead without you." Derek chipped in, his normal calm and positive tone restored. Ellie lifted her head and smiled as he recognized her for the hero she was. It wasn't that I didn't feel the same, it's just that the shock was overwhelming. "We need to help another friend now, honey. Do you want to grab Kat and come with me?" Ellie wrapped her clawed hand in mine as I clutched Derek's blood-soaked tweed cap with the other. She looked at me with love, just like she had at the beginning of this nightmare. The cold atmosphere of the floors below that we stood in had been reduced to a pile on the ground, just like Albert. We walked towards flat -51. Every step felt wobbly, like those few steps after a really spinny ride at the fair. I struggled to put one foot in front of the other. Derek dropped to where Essie lay squirming and put a gentle hand over her chest, carefully avoiding the splintered rib bones that stuck out. "I'm so sorry," he said to her as he shut his eyes, leant down and kissed her bloodied forehead. The shards of bone that decorated her entire body started to move and rearrange. She squealed in pain as her skin started to cauterize over the newly repositioned bone and innards. Her twisted limbs started to resemble something human again. I felt tears rolling down my face. Once she was as close to her usual herself as she was going to get, Derek took a step back as she opened her eyes, that had returned to the hollowed sockets, and looked directly at me. Essie was blind. She had always been blind, but she knew that I was there. We held her gently as the three of us helped her to her sofa, an exact replica of the one upstairs, placing each bruised limb into position as carefully as we could. The bruises shone purple and green underneath the harsh artificial lighting, reminding me that we weren't really home. "Cat," she struggled to speak. Her jaw hadn't quite relocated the whole way. I knew what she wanted, though. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slightly bloody cigarette. Essie reached out with broken fingers and held it to her lips as best she could as I put down the flat cap and lit it for her. "Come on, sweetheart, we're going to stand in the other room," Derek said to Ellie as he ushered her into the hallway and away from the smoke, leaving me alone with Ms. Beckman. "I'm sorry, Essie," I started. She tried to reply, but she could barely make a sound. "You were right, though. He did need help. Now no one in the block is going to go through what you have anymore. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Essie puffed on the cigarette with great difficulty. She could barely close her lips around it, but she persisted, with a glint in her eye that indicated this was the first pleasure she'd enjoyed in quite some time. She grunted a strained no at me. "Ellie did it. I can finally take her home now. I just wish that we could take you and Derek with us." I lit my own cigarette and took a long draw from it. "You can. No, not me. Go home. Go home," she managed, every word leaving a trail of pain in her face. I cringed. Despite her better appearance, she wasn't fixed. She was in as much pain as she had been before. I smiled at her, just to try and make her feel a little normal. "Speaking in fucking riddles again, Essie?" I responded, trying to muster a laugh through the tears that continued to fill my eyes. She looked directly at me again, and I knew that she had been serious. We finished our smoke in silence as I wept and she wheezed. "Derek!" I shouted after a few more minutes with her, encouraging him back into the flat. Him and Ellie appeared within seconds. He took one look at me, nodded with tears in his eyes too, and he knew what to do. I got up from the sofa and pulled Ellie in for a hug, careful to avoid her horns, making sure that she faced me. Then I watched over her shoulder as he delicately closed Essie's eyelids, and the wheezing stopped. I held in a sob and clutched my young friend as tightly as I could. Derek walked towards us and put his arms around the both of us for a moment in silent mourning before stepping back. Ellie looked up at me, a knowing in her voids, and she spoke. "I want to go home now, Kat." Her words broke what was left of my resolve. The sobbing began and Derek put his hand on my shoulder. He started to walk us out of the hallway, and as we reached the mess on the floor that had once been Albert, outside the door of flat -42, I came to a sudden stop. "No further. We need to go in there," I said, directing them into the open door of my anti-flat. Derek tried to speak and protest, but I stopped him the moment he opened his mouth. "Please, just trust me." I wasn't angry or frantic like before, and I think that he knew I wasn't trying to lead us into more trouble. I recognized that I'd probably done enough of that to last a lifetime. Essie hadn't led me astray before. Her advice had been sound. I'd taken a few detours, but I got to the right place eventually. If I were to respect her death, then I had to follow the last bit of advice she gave out. The flat was familiar. My sofa, fold-out table, and kitchen were all there, identical to the ones I'd spent so much time at. The flat was windowless, the sole indication in my confusion that I wasn't truly home. I pulled back the curtains of the balcony doors to reveal thick concrete behind them. It was sad, really, but I almost longed to see the window cleaner tapping on the glass and begging to be let in. I would trade his persistent harassment for my current predicament in a heartbeat. I felt my face sink. Whatever Essie had wanted me to see here wasn't as clear as I'd hoped. I should have anticipated that it wouldn't be easy. Derek and Ellie stood in silence as I inspected every inch of the place, even down to an equally smashed copy of the prison I had kept Jamie in. Frustrated, I eventually looped back into the living room, prepared to walk out the front door and follow Derek to the basement entrance, where he would leave us again. The prospect of going through all that, for him to remain trapped in these layers, was more disheartening than anything I'd felt before. Then I saw the light. It wasn't a eureka moment, or some sort of religious epiphany. It was an actual physical light. It wasn't artificial like the one that had plagued our stay in the Undertower. It was real, and it was coming from the sun. "How?" Derek uttered in wonder as his eyes fixed on the grate that had appeared at the top of the concrete, behind the sliding balcony doors. The sun flooding in lit up his whole face and electrified his kind eyes. The opening looked just the same as it had the night I found the kittens, but from the other side, its appearance was all the more poignant. Who would have thought that metal bars could signify such freedom? When it first appeared, I had never imagined that something other than a basement could exist beneath the block. "Thank you, Essie." I looked up at the ceiling and imagined her smile as it had been before Albert had got to her. She knew she couldn't be saved, but she made sure Derek didn't have to stay. And I knew that in her death, she wouldn't have to suffer again. The grate was just large enough for a person to fit through with enough of a squeeze, and I could almost make out the shrubbery me and the twins had planted. "See? You're coming too!" I grinned at Derek with the first bit of true joy I'd felt in quite some time. He didn't protest this time, or argue at all. He smiled back and just said two simple words. "Thank you." I pulled open the sliding door, and Ellie, who had been stood to the side, climbed the curtain with her claws as quickly as possible. I was amazed and grateful that she didn't pull them down. I watched in awe as she wrenched the bars away from the concrete and uninterrupted sunlight poured into the lower flat. The sunlight bathed us all, and Ellie dropped to the ground the same time as her claws and horns began to retract. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the voids disappeared, but they did. There she was, mess of blonde hair on her head and brown puppy dog eyes looking at us as she hit the ground with a thud. A little girl you wouldn't suspect more than a tantrum of replaced the ferocious beast that had protected me through this hellish landscape. The front door that led to the hallway where Albert's remains laid had suddenly been replaced by a thick blank wall just as the lift that brought us here had been. All that remained was the flat, the three of us, and the open grate. I pulled one of the chairs from the fold-out table below it and turned to Derek. "You first, so you can pull us out." He was busy staring at the newly transformed girl. There was a guilt in his eyes, and he looked at Ellie more strangely than he had when she was demonic. Regardless, the connection was still there. I handed him the flat cap, still soaked in blood, and he placed it onto his head with a genuine smile. He looked himself again with it in place as he took a step onto the chair. Before climbing out, he turned to us and winked. He wriggled through the grate with some difficulty and reached his hands back through. I watched Ellie's tiny clawless hand clutch his fingerless one as he hoisted her through the gap. Left alone in the flat, I took another look at my surroundings and took a moment to consider all the pain beneath the block. I imagined a life where Ellie hadn't come with me, and I was trapped for good or dead at the hands of the rat creatures. As I burst through the small gap, pulled by both Derek and Ellie, the bright sun and sensation of the shrubs in my hair as I crawled through them felt like a rebirth. The garden was stunning. Dewdrops littered the green foliage, and the rising orange sun lit them up like fireflies. I had never been more appreciative of it. Looking back at the outer edge of the building, the grate was gone, along with any indication that it had been there at all. I wondered why it had appeared in my flat down there, why I had been the person to find it both times. And I remembered what Albert had said about the building altering those who stay. I pondered he was right, and if it was possible that it had altered me already. As we sat in the fresh morning air, I knew that none of it really mattered. Standing outside of a grim city tower block was cathartic. Gray concrete had never looked so inviting. We were home. The scenes of carnage and destruction that I had imagined would greet us when we entered the building were nowhere to be seen. Albert had certainly cleaned up. There was no kitten leg or creatures, or even evidence of a kerfuffle. It made me all the more nervous. I had no idea who had been hurt. The slow trudge to Ellie's floor was painful. My limbs all ached and the ringing in my ears continued. Still, I was just so glad to be getting her home. I couldn't wait to see Terry's face when we returned her daughter safely. Ellie may have looked a mess, but she was alive and well, which was the best I could ask for given the circumstances. I wish I could say that Terry greeted us with joy. I really do wish I could. Instead, her face was sullen, and the dark circles that sat like tattoos looked deeper than before. The skin around her eyes was puffed up and swollen with tears. When she spotted Ellie, she fell to her knees with relief. I hoped her face would brighten, but it didn't. "Where is he?" she sobbed, grabbing hold of Ellie and clutching her as tightly as she could. "Where's my son?" My heart dropped to my stomach. I'd made a sea of bad decisions in my time, but this, if this was what Albert had meant, was the worst consequence I could have imagined. I tried to find words, but I couldn't. I'd never seen a person look quite so broken. The pain in the screams of the mangled people wasn't a patch on Terry's sobbing. "Is that his blood?" she asked, gesturing to our clothes and hair while struggling to speak. I had been complacent. If the creatures had overpowered Eddie, if they had won, then maybe there wasn't enough of him left for Albert to see that he was like his sister. I shouldn't have written off the possibility like I had. Derek stepped forwards and put his hands on Terry's shoulders. She winced, and I remembered the lockdown situation, the only grounding in reality that I'd felt since returning to the upper layers of the block. She looked him in the eyes. "I don't know if you remember me, Terry. You were very small the last time we met, but I remember your parents." His kindly eyes had locked with hers as she melted and collapsed into him, wailing and gasping for air. Together we walked her to the sofa, not unlike how we had Essie not long before. I'd never known Terry's flat to be so quiet. Eddie was always playing, he was always so loud, and he always came home. Ellie was the absconder. It's why I'd found it easy to convince myself that Eddie was playing in his room, disrupting Terry's sleep like normal as we navigated the layers below. In all honesty, I think I was just trying to convince myself that I couldn't possibly be responsible for the death of a child. Logically, I always knew that with his sister gone for that long, he'd go looking. I really hoped we would get home in time, that he could hold his own. I don't know. Anything but this. I had buried my worries. Terry couldn't breathe properly through thick, heavy sobs. The noise muffled my already fucked up ears. Derek sat with his arms around her while Ellie nuzzled into his other side, and I sat opposite, blood-soaked, devastated, and alone. Knock, knock, knock. The tapping on the door brought all conversation, sobbing and brooding to a stop. Terry sprinted to the door, hope in her eyes, and as it opened, she wailed in joy. "Get off me, Mum! Where's Ellie?" The familiar voice of the young boy jolted me back into the room, and I turned to see Eddie, accompanied by none other than Mr. Prentice. Eddie spotted his sister on the sofa and ran towards the three of us. "Whoa, where did all the blood come from? Cool," he shouted. There were a few cuts and bruises covering his limbs, but he seemed mostly unharmed. His excitement was enough to tell me that he was okay. Derek stared at him in disbelief, not unlike how he had Ellie upon their first meeting. I turned and walked towards the door, to where Terry and Mr. Prentice were speaking. Mr. Prentice wobbled slightly as he kept himself propped up with his cane. "What happened?" I asked. "I'm not sure. I heard a lot of banging and decided I should go and check what was going on. I found him at the bottom by that ghastly lift. I didn't recognize the man in the suit. I couldn't get close enough, but I don't understand how anyone could stand over an injured child and not help. He ran into the lift when I got closer, and you know how I like to avoid that place. I'm not sure why folk run from me sometimes, but it was probably for the best. I'm not sure what I'd have done." I imagined Mr. Prentice in his animal form running towards Albert. Imagining that the landlord had run scared from the beast warmed my heart. "Anyway, I'm rather tired, so if you don't..." Mr. P stopped as he caught a glimpse of the inside of the flat behind us. His eyes widened. "Is that Derek?" Derek came up behind us and reached out a bloodied hand to shake Mr. Prentice's. The elderly man looked unsteady on his cane, as if he had seen a ghost. "It's been years," he stuttered, beaming, firmly gripping Derek's intact hand. "We shall have to have a drink together, my friend." "We will," Derek smiled. "I'm back now. There'll be plenty of time to catch up." Terry clutched the twins tightly as the two men reveled in their meeting. I couldn't help but smile quietly to myself and think of Essie. The kids were safe, Derek was back, and Albert couldn't continue to terrorize the block. And yet again, Mr. Prentice had proved himself the real MVP. We left Terry and the kids to have some family time. Ellie hugged Derek so tightly as we left, I thought she might crush him. We walked back to the 7th floor where mine and Mr. P's flats were. It should have been a victory walk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything wasn't entirely over. My feeling was confirmed once the door to flat 48 closed behind Mr. Prentice, and Derek looked at me gravely. There's a few more things you need to know, Kat. Can you get cleaned up and meet me in the garden?" Maria on the moon. "Did you know that early astronomers thought there were oceans on the moon?" I asked, looking up from my book. My mom shifted in her bed, a tangle of IV tubes shifting with her. "Of course. The moon seems like the perfect place to find an ocean." "What a shame we never found water then," I said, "because those false seas, astronomers called them Maria." Mom smiled. "How sweet of them to name the moon oceans after me." "Well, they didn't find any oceans," I reminded her. "Maybe they just didn't look hard enough," she replied, a little laugh slipping from her lips. For all of the pain she was in, all of the fear she must feel, my mother always had the kind of laugh that could light a candle. We were in her hospital room, the same one we'd been in and out of for the last year and a half. Sometimes we had a roommate, sometimes we were alone. Always she held steady enough for both of us, the rock I tied my hope to, the wall against the grief I knew was coming. Cancer is such a mundane word for something so hungry and cruel. I've noticed medicine does that a lot, covers horror with tedious language like a bedsheet over a body. Malignant, inoperable, metastasized, terminal. But when she laughed, we weren't in the hospital anymore. We were home. When she laughed, she wasn't sick, she was young again. And I was a kid, and the world was a bright place begging to be explored. What a miracle my mother was. Cancer had taken so much from her, aged and hurt her, but it could never steal her laugh. That was hers to keep. "How are we feeling today?" the doctor asked. He came in less and less often. We could all sense this was the final stay in this room. "Just brilliant, Doc," my mom said, struggling to sit a little higher. "We can still go dancing later if you'd like, though we'll have to ask for my son's blessing. Ever since his dad died, Brian's been very protective of me." I put on a stern face. "I'll need to know your intentions are pure, Doctor." Bradshaw. "As the driven snow," he played along. "But I might need a rain check on the dance, Ms. Willen. I'm not as young as I used to be." He emphasized his age, running his fingers through gray-white hair. My mom tapped her bare scalp. "Right there with you, Tiger," she said. Dr. Bradshaw smiled, but I could tell he was burdened. I saw him glance at the small idol I'd placed on my mother's nightstand. The talisman was a miniature oak tree carved from gray soapstone. There were 4 faces etched into the tree, a sentry against ill health and bitter spirits. I could tell the stone tree made the doctor uncomfortable. In all honesty, I had a tough time looking at the idol for more than a few seconds. The faces were each whittled in vivid expression. The face closest to my mother's bed was smiling kindly, and the face pointed towards the door was snarling, meant to ward away harm. The final 2 faces were both weeping. All 4 shapes were too human, too raw. There was a weirdness to the stone tree that put people on edge, but I'd grown used to every shade of weird you can imagine. My mother's side of the family was full of stories of unexplained luck and mysterious tragedy, whispered secrets and unexplained deaths. By all accounts, my maternal grandmother was either an honest-to-goodness witch or full-bore, high-caliber crazy, or both. Probably both. The stone tree was from a box of my grandmother's things I'd found in the attic earlier that month. Maybe it was just a coincidence, but my mom did seem to get a bit better when I'd brought in the talisman, at least for a little while. I was daydreaming about family history and the odd box while Dr. Bradshaw checked his charts and Mom's vitals. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" he asked, ripping me back to reality. Dr. Bradshaw tried to keep a light tone, but I could tell he didn't have good news. The hospital hallway smelled like ammonia and birthday cake. Someone must have had a party, maybe a patient, maybe a nurse. Strange how you remember the insignificant details while your world is crashing down around you. "I'm so sorry," Dr. Bradshaw told me. "The results came in this morning. It's spreading aggressively. We held it back as long as we could, Brian. Your mom is a fighter, but right now we just need to try to keep her as comfortable as we can. Brian?" The wall was cracking, grief waiting on the other side, heavy and cold as an empty house. I'd known for months that this was the most likely outcome, but it still hurt to hear. Hurt worse than I could stomach. "There's nothing left to try?" I asked, fighting down the urge to throw up. "Anything? Experimental? Untested? Anything?" Dr. Bradshaw shook his head. "I'm sorry. Sometimes we just run out of options. She fought a good fight." "How long does she have left?" I asked, looking back into her room. She'd fallen asleep. "Not long. Maybe days. Have you considered hospice?" The smell of ammonia and birthday cake. The steady beep of Mom's heart monitor. I tried to focus on the world around me. My hope wasn't dead yet. If medicine couldn't help my mom, maybe something older could. I thought of the box of my grandmother's things waiting in the attic. There was a lot in there I hadn't gone through yet. Books and candles and secrets and lost things. Maybe there was a cure, or at least a way to keep the fight going. "No," I said. "If all that's left is to make her comfortable, I want to take her home." The doctor smiled. "I understand. We can give you some medication, ways to help her with the pain." He put his hand on my shoulder. "Your mom's been in a lot of pain, but she'll have peace soon. You've done all you can." "I know," I lied. "Thank you." Mom lived in a small ranch house 10 miles outside of town. There wasn't much in the way of neighbors besides some woods and a creek slithering through her yard. It was a windy, warm March afternoon when I took my dying mother home. That night I began my work. I was going to turn the house into a bunker, a maze death could never solve. I would keep my mother safe, I would find a way to keep her alive. The little red book was full of ideas. Running water was an obvious place to start. The creek behind the house was barely a trickle, but it should provide some coverage to the south side of the property. Salt was next, lining the doorways and window frames, then in an unbroken circle around the entire house. This step was to be repeated daily, the red book stressed, or even multiple times per day. Even a moderate breeze played holy havoc with any salt poured outside, so it was always best to trace and retrace every few hours. Water and salt were common defenses against man's oldest enemy and well known. The book offered other, less conventional advice. It took me nearly a week to finish carving the symbols and signs into the walls, the floors, even the trees on the property. Sometime around noon on the third day, on my back in the crawl space etching strange marks onto the underside of the floor, it struck me how ridiculous I was acting. There was no proof that any of the information in the little red book was anything other than the delusional ramblings of a bizarre woman I'd only met once or twice as a child. For all I knew, the runes meant to ward off death were actually a grocery list written in Cantonese. But I was desperate, and every time I saw my mother, she looked frailer, more fragile. So I continued carving and praying and building layers upon layers of protections to keep death far away. Making my marks took me all over the property. It was a big yard, nearly 3 acres that blended gradually into the surrounding forest. I wasn't able to pinpoint the exact boundary where cultivated met nature. The edges simply bled together. But I did my best to create a clean border with lines between the symbols. I'd always loved the wildness here, the way you could wander a few hundred yards away from home and feel like you'd traveled hundreds of years into the past to somewhere primal. This was the perfect playground for a kid, whether I was out exploring trails or trapping minnows, or spending the summer building yet another tree house, convinced this would be the final one. It never was. I was never satisfied. The house itself, though small, was more than enough room for my mother and me. Dad died when I was 7. I don't remember much about him, just how big he seemed, with a bonfire grin and arms that I thought could hold the whole world. My mom often said I took after my father. I could see it in the old pictures of him. We had the same eyes, green as moss in the summer, and the same fiery shock of red hair, enemy to every comb on the planet. The sicker Mom got, the more often she called me by my father's name. I worried when she drifted away like that, but a part of me was proud she'd mistake me for him. After all of the symbols were carved, there were a few steps left in the book to deter death from visiting. There were dozens of charms and talismans in the bottom of the old box in the attic. I sat up there, combing through everything my grandmother left behind, referencing the red book, pushing the tiny charms into tidy piles. None of the idols were larger than my thumb. Some were iron and others were wood. Some were heavy, others light. All of them were uncomfortable to look at or touch. The attic was drafty, but not nearly enough to explain the cold that burrowed into me as I sorted the charms. I'm not particularly tall, but the attic felt like it was designed for dolls. Beams so low I couldn't even walk bent over. I moved around on my knees, rough floorboards threatening splinters even through my jeans. I could have taken the box downstairs where I'd have more room, but the idea filled me with a deep unease. It seemed better to leave the box up in the attic, only taking down objects as I needed them. Up here, at least, my grandmother's items, her legacy was quarantined. The red book was very specific about the distribution of the totems around the house and property. I walked carefully through my mom's backyard, boots plopping in and out of mud, compass in hand. It had rained nearly every day since I'd taken my mom home from the hospital. I knew it was almost certainly a coincidence, but couldn't help wonder if the soft curtains of rain falling to the ground were for her. I placed charms in a compass rose with the house in the middle. The most disturbing objects were given places of honor at each cardinal direction. Water, salt, wards, charms, all placed carefully, intentionally. My grandmother's book promised that these would offer some degree of protection against the inevitability of death. The symbols would confuse it, the talismans distract it, and the water and salt make barriers to slow it down. But death might still find a crack to slip through, so the Red Book recommended one final trick. There was a small candle in the bottom of the box, dirty white as stained paper. When I took the candle from its case, the smell made me gag. Have you ever walked past a portable toilet in the dog days of summer? When it's so hot the blue plastic has started to warp and bubble? Imagine that smell distilled into a finger's worth of wax. I brought the candle downstairs, placed it on the dining room table, and set it alight. The wick caught immediately, the flame burning an unusual red-brown. No heat came off of the candle, and it actually seemed cooler the closer I moved my hand to the fire. Once the wax began to melt, the smell was 10 times worse than it was back in the attic. I choked down a greasy sickness crawling up my throat and quickly left the room, shutting the French doors as I went. That helped trap the odor, but I couldn't shake the sense of nausea. I went to check on my mother. "Do you remember the day you ran away?" my mom asked, sitting in her bed, lunch untouched on the nightstand beside her. I didn't think she had any weight left to lose before she was nothing but bone and memory. Her skin was rice paper over a frame that seemed smaller every day. Her eyes, though, no matter how fragile the rest of her became, remained two little lanterns against the dark, blue and bright and alive. "I didn't make it very far," I answered, "and I wasn't really running away, only stretching my legs." Mom smiled. "You told me you were leaving for the circus. You wanted to be either a lion tamer or a strong man or maybe a fire eater." I think I wanted to be all of that combined. Young me was big on multitasking. My mother turned, so she was looking out the window into the yard. "I was so scared when I found your note, the one saying you were leaving. My hands were shaking like you wouldn't believe when I called the sheriff and then Mr. Jonas down the way. It felt like we were searching for you for half the night, even though it couldn't have been more than an hour before we found you there, lost in the woods, wandering around and shivering. You hadn't even brought a jacket." I sat next to my mom on the bed. "Yeah, I didn't exactly plan ahead for my circus escape. I remember getting over the idea real quick, but I couldn't find my way back. I'm glad you found me." "I'm glad too," my mother said, and I noticed her wipe away a tear. "I'm so glad. That hour you were gone, Brian, that was the most afraid I've ever been. Afraid we wouldn't find you. Afraid you might be hurt or worse. I couldn't hardly breathe through the fear. Then suddenly, you were there and the relief nearly knocked me over. I think we stayed up together the rest of the night watching the stars. I wanted to make sure you could find the North Star in case you ever got lost again." She turned back to me, reached out her thin hand and placed it over mine. There were still tears in her eyes, but she smiled her lighthouse smile, and for a moment, I saw her just as she used to be, just as she was the night I ran away and my mom found me. I squeezed her hand. I was scared too. I was afraid I'd be stuck out there. "What made you think of it?" "Well, I've been thinking a lot about dying lately and—" "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't talk like that. You're not going anywhere, not for a long time." "It's okay," she said, squeezing my hand back. "It's okay. I've known real fear, and what I'm feeling now. It's not like that. I'm scared, I guess, but I'm at peace with it. I had such a beautiful life. I'm so glad I got to meet you, to be your mom." "I'm glad too," I whispered, voice breaking on the last word. "But I won't let you go without a fight," I added silently in my mind. Something was trying to get to my mom. The strangeness began the day after I lit the candle. At first it was small blips, tiny wrongs that I chalked up to my imagination. Doors I knew I'd closed at night were open in the morning. Food began to rot and spoil within days of me bringing it into the house. Eventually, food would go bad almost immediately. Every few hours, the television in the living room would either turn off if it was running or on if it was off. Clocks would stop overnight, always at 3:03 a.m. Shadows began sticking to the corners of rooms independent of any light sources. The shadows were stubborn, and they would linger for as long as I would stare, then disappear when I blinked. I began hearing bumps and knocks at all hours, and sometimes, when I'd enter an empty room, I had a sharp, fleeting certainty that it was only just occupied. I avoided the dining room except to check in twice a day to see if the candle was still burning. The smell was vicious and would claw its way into your throat and nostrils the moment it was given a chance. I kept the door to the room shut and kept air fresheners running in the surrounding rooms 24/7. The funny thing was, the candle never went out, never even seemed to shrink. I could see the wax melting, but day in and day out the candle refused to change. Days marched into weeks, and the wrongness only grew deeper. My mom and I both lost sleep to vivid nightmares that we couldn't remember when we woke up. Only the echoes remained, but those were enough to leave my pulse sprinting until morning. I started sleeping in a chair in my mother's room. I did this to comfort her if she woke up confused during the night, but also because, if I'm being honest, I was too scared to sleep alone. I felt like a child running into his parents' room, convinced there was a monster under the bed. Thing is, maybe there was. By the third week, I couldn't keep doors closed. They would slam open the moment I left the room. A terrible scratching began inside of the walls. I told my mom it might be squirrels or mice, but the sound was so insistent, not like rodents milling about, more like a dog wanting in. I stopped leaving the house for supplies. Instead, I had what little food we ate delivered. I kept the curtains drawn. There was tapping on the glass every night. About a month after leaving the hospital, we were living like zombies. The dining room couldn't contain the smell of the candle anymore. The entire house was clogged with the scent. Tiny noises had graduated into full-on laughs and screams and whispers in the rooms around us. Something kicked the bathroom door so hard while I was taking a shower that the hinges warped. I covered every mirror in the house. I'd started to see things in the corners looking back at me, half-hidden faces, shapes that skittered away as soon as I turned around. Mom was drifting further and further away. She had long moments of confusion where she'd forget my name, forget where we were. Sometimes she'd think I was my dad. Other times, she'd just stare at the wall for hours, growing fainter and fainter each day like a Polaroid left in the sun. But she was alive. It was clear that we were under siege by something. My world shrank to only one room, and every trip to the bathroom, or to answer the door for food, felt like going over the trenches. The noises kept getting worse and worse, the shadows closer, the sense of movement around the house sharper. Every now and then I would feel hot breath on the back of my neck or walk through a cold patch hanging in the air. I stopped bothering redrawing the lines of salt around the house. I knew deep in my bones that as long as the sickly candle burned, death could not take my mom away. On the 33rd day after leaving the hospital, I woke with a start from a nightmare, only to find my mom's bed empty. She hadn't been able to walk the past week at all, so my first feeling was hope that she might be improving, at least a little. Then I noticed the odor we'd been living with for weeks was gone. "Mom!" I shouted, running in bare feet out of the room. I found her in the dining room, the door wide open. She was standing at the table, frail as a neglected scarecrow, bobbing back and forth. Her hands were hovering over the candle. The flame was out. "Why did you do that?" I whispered. "Mom? Mom? Are you okay?" I padded into the room, the wooden floor freezing cold. My mother didn't react to my presence. She just continued rocking side to side. I realized she was still asleep. "Mom?" I gently shook her shoulder. "Wake up." Her head snapped back and she nearly fell. I caught her on the way down. It felt like she weighed nothing at all. "What's going on?" she asked, looking around the dark room. "Where?" "You're okay," I told her. "You were sleepwalking." "I was having the most unusual dream," Mom mumbled. "There were so many stars and—" She began to shiver uncontrollably. The cold hit me a moment later. I let out a gasp. The house was chilly before, but the dining room was near Arctic. My breath bloomed into a thin cloud in front of my face. I became acutely aware of the complete silence filling the house. Then I heard scratching. It was coming all throughout the house, deep tearing sounds at the walls around the dining room. Footsteps came immediately after, heavy and fast. Somewhere in the house, a window shattered. "Brian," my mother said, holding on to me. "Don't worry," I said. "Everything will be—" My voice deserted me as a massive shadow unfolded in the corner of the room. It was shaped like a man, but tall. So very tall. And it was fast. Before I could yell, the shadow was on us, pouring over my mother. In the space of a heartbeat, she was simply gone. "No," I whispered, clawing at the dissolving shadow where my mom used to be. "No, no, 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 no." The shadow was disappearing like a puddle sinking into the floor. There was a texture to it, oily and too slick to hold. I thought of my mother the night she found me lost in the woods, the night I'd run away. Her face filled my memory, her lighthouse smile. I remembered the relief I felt when she found me, the overwhelming love. I held on to that feeling, clutching it close. "You can't have her," I whispered. I closed my fist around the last threads of the shadow. There was a terrible sensation of pulling. It was like I'd caught a horse by the tail and it was trying to shake me. But I held on. A sense of ripping and being dragged. It was a riptide with a mind of its own. But I held on. It could not shake me. The temperature was dropping every second and I felt my vision growing dark. The last thought that ran through my head before I blacked out was a promise to myself that even if I died, my grip would hold. I wouldn't let my mother's life slip away. All sounds and light faded, narrowing to a pinprick and then going black. I woke up under a field of stars. I was lying in soft grass, still wearing my pajama bottoms and an old t-shirt. It was cool, wherever I was, but comfortably so. I stood up. There were trees all around me, tall and close, stitched together with shadows. Immediately to my right, there was a road that ran straight as far as I could see, blurring into the horizon. But the stars, they were like nothing I'd ever seen before. Bright ribbons of northern lights rippled above me in green and blue and purple. Stars lit the sky like millions of lanterns floating on a still ocean. The moon shone sharpest of all, a spotlight hanging above the tree line, so close I thought I could stretch up and brush its face. "You are persistent," said a voice from the forest behind me. I whipped around but couldn't see anyone. Then a dark spot began to clarify against the gloom. The silhouette separated itself and moved towards me. I recognized it instantly as the shadow from the dining room. As it moved closer, the thing grew and grew until it touched the sky and filled my vision. A deep dread sank into me, but I stood my ground. "Give me back my mom," I shouted. The silhouette pulled away from the sky, and then it was standing in front of me, the shape and size of a tall man. But instead of a shadow, the thing had wrapped itself in stars. Miniature constellations drifted across its body, floating slowly like a time-lapse of a clear night sky. Burning brightest was the North Star, blue and warm. The space between the stars was absolute black, not a shadow, but a complete absence of light. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "What are you?" I whispered. "You know," it replied. "Give her back," I begged. "Please, give her back." "I can't. It's her time. Past her time. You delayed me. Delayed her." I clenched my fists. "She didn't get enough time. I didn't get enough time. It's not right. It's not fair." "Of course it's not fair," the starry thing said. "But it is right. You each have your time. And at the end of it, there's me. And there is a road. And we walk it together." "Where to?" I asked. "Where are you taking her?" "I don't know. It's not for me to know, only to know how to get there." "Then I won't let you take her." I planted myself in the road. The world was still and solemn around us. The constellations drifted like clouds and a soft breeze stirred the branches. The starry thing didn't respond for a moment. "Your mother was kind and caring. Wherever she goes, she'll have peace," it promised. "But," the creature raised its hand, "did you ever stop to think that death isn't an enemy? Death simply is. It is the natural partner to life. It knows no prejudice or malice, has no designs or ambitions. Your mother spent so long suffering, felt so much pain. Instead of letting her rest, You took it upon yourself to draw her life beyond its given course. You kept her alive, but at the cost of stretching her thin, prolonging her sickness, diluting her. Did you keep her alive for her benefit or for yours? I couldn't answer. Stretching a life is unnatural, dangerous, it told me. In the weeks you kept me away, you drew the attention of old things, hungry things, forces that would like nothing better than to swallow even the memory of your mother, to tear and bite until there was nothing left but pain and fear and a perfect emptiness. I shuddered, remembering the clawing sounds, the shattered window, and the laughter from empty rooms. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Can they hurt her here? Is she safe?" The stars in the shadow burned brighter for a moment. "Your mother won't walk her road alone. None of you do. I walk with you, always to the end." "Can I see her?" I asked. "Please, let me say goodbye." It considered for several seconds. "You are persistent." And then the starry thing was gone. I was standing alone on an empty road. "Brian." I turned to find my mother behind me on the road. She looked younger, healthier than I'd seen her in years. The frailty was gone, and my mother seemed exactly as I remembered her when she found me in the woods all those years ago. "Isn't this the most beautiful dream?" she asked, staring up at the night sky. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "A beautiful dream. I love you, Mom. I love you so much, so very much." She smiled and touched my cheek. "I love you too. Don't cry, it's okay. I'll wake up any time now. I'll see you then." I nodded, wiping at tears. "Sure, yeah, I'll see you then." "What do you think is at the end of the road?" she asked. "Do you think I'll have time to find out before I wake up?" I looked out at the road, scanning the trees for any hungry shadows. "I don't know. I don't know where it goes, but promise me you'll be careful." My mom smiled wider. "Of course I'll be careful." "And she won't walk alone," said a familiar voice behind us both. I turned, expecting the starry thing. But the man standing on the road was entirely normal. The light from the moon was enough that I could see he had moss-green eyes and a bright shock of red hair. "Such a beautiful dream," my mother said. The man came towards us and took my mother's hand. He and I looked so alike, I could see why my mother confused us when she was sick. "Take care of her," I told the man. Just please take care of her. Make sure she gets where she's going. There are things out there that want her to hurt her. It's my fault. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The man squeezed my shoulder. "She'll be safe, watched over. If the devil himself is waiting on the road ahead, he'll move, or he'll be moved." I believed him. Thoughts raced through my head. There were so many things I wanted to say, questions, a million ways to say goodbye. I wanted to stretch out the moment for as long as I could, but I realized I'd already delayed my mother enough. "I love you," I told them both. "Goodbye." I woke up back in my dining room, sitting at the table, the unlit candle in front of me. The house was quiet and still. There was no more scratching, no sound or sense of life at all. I walked through every room. The house was empty. I was alone. I've spent the past couple months working on the house, erasing the marks I'd made, fixing up the property. Some nights I take long walks out into the forest. I'm far enough out in the country that on clear nights it's like looking up at a sea of stars. I think about my parents the most during those walks. I grieve and remember in my own way. And I wonder where their road went, if they're still traveling or if they reached their destination. I hope that their road takes them strange and beautiful places. When I walk at night, I look up for the North Star to keep from getting lost. Maybe they do the same. When it's full, I also look up towards the moon. I wonder if my parents had a chance to visit, to search for hidden oceans. I like to think they did, that the moon has at least one Maria, the one I love most.
Recently, I met a medium who promised me proof. Read this to the end, and you will believe too. I'm sitting on a sofa in a cramped, messy room. The carpet is faded and stained, the wallpaper peeling, and spots of mold speckle the ceiling. Everything about this old house screams disrepair. Next to me on the sofa, an old man with sagging, papery skin sits staring at an empty chair in the corner. A younger man, somewhere in his 30s, in a suit with a slick haircut and white smile of a dentist, or maybe a realtor, flashes his pearly whites at the old man and says, "Hello, sir. My name is Nathan. I'm a spiritual medium. Your family reached out to me and asked for my services. Can you tell me some of what you've been experiencing?" "She's there," growls the old man, still staring at the empty chair in the corner. "Who's there?" Nathan, the medium, glances at the chair. Back to the old man. "Who is it you see sitting in that chair?" He sniffs, wrinkles up his mouth in a frown. "Dunno her name. For the record, I don't believe in any of this stuff. I am here because I don't believe. I'm also recording this entire interaction. The old man, the medium, the invisible woman in the chair in the corner. I make sure to get the chair. Lots of footage of it. I am tempted to get up and go sit in it. But that would ruin this whole charade, wouldn't it? Anyway, I just keep filming." Nathan, the smarmy medium, who should be a realtor, looked confused when he first looked at the empty chair, but is now playing along, full woo-woo psychic mode, saying stuff like, to the woman in the chair, "Can I ask what you are doing here? What is it you would like to communicate?" Silence, and Nathan asks the old man, "Do you see any change in her?" The old man shakes his head. "She's just sitting there." A few minutes more of a lot of nothing. The medium decides to cast a blessing on the room to help put her spirit to rest. And then the old man sits up straight. His eyes go big. He says, "She's getting up." Then she's laughing. She's cursing at us. Then he starts whimpering. "She's coming closer. She's coming. She's coming. Stop her." He starts screaming, and the medium leaps up, chanting words of a prayer in what is probably Google translated Latin. He waves a hunk of burning sage and sprinkles salt, while the old man screams. I get the whole thing on my phone. The screaming, the sage, the sweat on Nathan the medium's brow, as he shouts with increasing ferocity over the old man's howls, snarling at the empty chair. And when the moment is right, I yell, "Cut!" The old man stops screaming. His face breaks into a grin as he turns to me. "How was that, Max?" "Brilliant, Pete. You were brilliant," I say, angling my phone toward myself and also speaking to the cameras we have set up to catch the psychic at work. I speak to my future audience, you all, who should subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. This is Pete, an actor. I'm Max, host of Debauchery and Debunkery, where we used to take a shot for each lie, but quickly realized we get drunk way too fast. Now, we just debunk stuff and get drunk later while laughing about it. The only person who is not an actor here is Nathan the medium, who, as you can see, quickly began speaking to an empty chair. "Nathan, you stated several times that you could sense the presence in the chair. What do you have to say now that you know Pete here is an actor?" Nathan has lost his charm. He stammers, red-faced, furious at having been set up, looking between me and Pete and the chair, as if unsure which of us is the most to blame for his predicament. He insists his powers are genuine and babbles that there is a spiritual energy in the chair, while I go on to remark about how the chair itself is from Target. We bought it this morning. So was there spiritual energy at the department store before we brought it in? He says it must be with the house then. I tell him how the house itself is a set. It's actually my house, and I live here. And this entry room doesn't usually look like this. We made it grubbier for effect. Though, I add, I guess you're right. There's not the greatest vibes. Feng shui has always been a little off in here, and I do need to replace the carpet. The stains are real. The mold spots on the ceiling are fake. You get the idea. Call me Max, short for Maxine, or Maximilian, depending on my mood. I'm currently Nathan the Medium's worst nightmare. What you are doing is entrapment, he snarls, his ruddy red face on the verge of tears. Oh, his business is gonna take a hit, all right. He keeps barking at me. You act so sanctimonious, but this bullshit is hurting people. You're hurting people by dismissing their beliefs, disrespecting the spiritual. I laugh at him. I'd say that's exactly what you're doing by taking advantage of people, just like you tried with Pete. Here, I bet you go into schools and debunk Santa Claus to the little kids. How telling that you compare what you do to lying to children. So you know you're lying. You just think it's okay because they're feel-good lies. You know what? Make fun all you want, but this stuff is real. You're a fool to mess with it. He turns and storms out. My last shot of him is both middle fingers held up. His dramatic exit is marred almost immediately by his return moments later, his face now blank as thrusts a business card into my hand. For skeptics, he says, call her, and she'll make you believe. Thanks for the tip, Nathan. Probably won't, though. It usually doesn't work when people know ahead of time. Call her. She will make you believe, he repeats again before turning on his heel and striding out. I look at the card. It just says, make believe on one side, and on the other is an eye and a number. The eye has a nifty effect. Where it appears to always be looking at you, the card is matte black, with simple lettering. I tuck it in my pocket. A few days later, Nathan the Medium contacts me via text. The episode has already aired. I'm sure Nathan is pissed about it. No doubt, he's getting a lot of emails and calls. He's getting roasted in the comments. So is messaging me. It's not surprising. Probably to beg me to remove it. Offer to bribe me. I've had all kinds of things. His message, when I open it, surprises me. Forget what I said about the card. Just throw it away, please. Now, I've always been a contrarian. Had forgotten about the card until that moment. But of course, after his request, I go digging it up. The matte black, the eye, the words, make believe, and the number to call. I call it, out of curiosity, making sure to record the call. So I'll have material later for an episode if this turns into anything. There's no ringing, just a voice, connecting almost immediately. The address is redacted. Come if you want to believe. Corny, probably not worth the effort of a debunk, but the address isn't too far from my sister's house, and I have to visit her anyway to help her with a few things and talk about my brother-in-law. He's battling cancer. I make a note about it, and the next day, before I head over to see my sister, I swing by the address. It takes a while to find. A small psychic reading shop. More of a nook, really, tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. You have to go down a set of stairs to even find the door, and the room is so small, it feels like stepping into a janitor's closet. The woman inside is neither old nor young. She's somewhere between 30 and 50. An unremarkable bird of a woman with beady dark eyes and hair like a crow's wings. Glossy black with a bluish sheen, must be dyed. She's sitting in a chair in the corner, in a long black gown, stiff as a doll that's been posed. She has only one eye, which follows me as I step in and sit down in the chair opposite her. The other eye is shrouded in shadow. Also, the lights in here are very low. It's a nice effect, hokey, but visually arresting. Props to her for atmosphere. Minus a few points for being so cliché. "Hello, Max," says the woman. So Nathan obviously did give her the heads up. So much for debunking. Even so, I ask her if I can record. She cackles a little and motions for me to go ahead. So I take out my phone and start recording us both. Though I don't have much hope for anything from this given she's already been prepped for me by Nathan. Still, why not? I clear my throat and say, "I'm told you can make anyone believe." "Sure," she agrees. "Okay, make me believe." Her head cocks, raven-like, and she examines me. Her eye drifts to the camera. "Is this really what you want, Max? To be made to believe? Me and my viewers, and your viewers." Again, that throaty chuckle. How nice. All right then, Max, the debunker. I'll make a bargain with you. In 5 days, if I've made you believe, you publicly announce your belief before you end yourself and your channel. If you still don't believe in 5 days, nothing happens to you. The sheer gall of this lunatic, I can't help smiling. And myself and my channel, I echo. That's the worst bargain I've ever heard. Why would I agree to that? Because you don't believe. You believe you won't believe. And you're an arrogant shit who wants clicks. And making this bargain will give them to you. She makes actually a very good point. Also, she's right. I absolutely do not believe. I say as much to my camera, and then say, "Okay, crazy lady, fine, I accept your bargain, but just recording this to note that I have no plans to commit suicide, and if I appear to do so, and this lady has murdered me, I expect her to be arrested." She just looks at me with a flat, black eye. "So how are you going to make me believe?" I ask. "Tell me the names of 3 people." She grunts. "Kenji," I say, "my brother-in-law. He dies on Friday," she says. "Loses his battle with cancer. My condolences." Wow. Okay. Obviously, you did your research. It's called a hot reading, when a purported psychic will look up information about a subject before the reading and then recite facts about them that seem astonishing to the audience. Nathan told her I was coming, so she obviously looked up my brother-in-law and his condition. My brother-in-law could pass at any time. Friday is very specific, but it's not a bad gamble. I find it in poor taste. She throws out his death so casually, though, wagering her whole charade on his ill health. "That one's too easy," she says, as if agreeing with my thoughts. "Who else?" "Sarah, my sister, who is going through it right now with Kenji's illness." She shakes her head. "Nothing much happens to her in the next 5 days, except for grieving her husband. Name someone else." "What number? You said I can name anybody." I named Sarah. "You can't make a prediction for her." She sighs and rolls her eyes. "It's your episode, Max. There are plenty of more interesting options, but fine. Your sister Sarah forgets a bag of groceries and has to go back for it. Inside are 2 apples, some herbal medicine your brother-in-law requested that she'll never get a chance to deliver to him, and chocolates for you. This is all so specific. Already, I'm thinking of how it could be staged. Could this woman bribe one of the store workers at the co-op my sister shops at? Or maybe this make-believe woman has got a bug in her ear now. Someone is whispering stuff to her, and they've been watching Sarah, and the shopping has already happened. I'm still considering how elaborate this might be, or if she's just doing what most of these scammers do, lie. The woman says, "I'll pick the 3rd person because you're about to say Mateo. And yes, his wife is cheating on him. You'll say it's too easy for me to have guessed. You think I have an accomplice listening and feeding me clues. So instead, let's pick Pete. In 3 days, he has a heart attack from seeing her. Seeing who? The woman in the chair, her lips curved in a ghastly smile. Pete the actor. There's no woman in any chair. I paid him to make her up. He'll call you in 3 days, and he'll tell you he's been seeing her. He'll beg you to make her go away. He'll warn you. He'll plead. He's an actor, I snap. Did you hire him? He'll say that he knew you'd say that. He'll beg you to believe him, but you won't. Well, this last one sounds easy enough to stage. Anyway, though if they can make the stuff happen with my sister, I'll be both really impressed and probably filing a lawsuit for stalking. As for my brother-in-law, it's disgusting they'd even talk about him that way. Oh, Max, she says, as I am leaving, take my card. I love referrals. Refer me to someone else, and maybe I'll make them believe in your place. Whatever, I growl and step out of the place, ascending the stairs into the bright sun. She makes my skin crawl. Not because she's connected to the occult, but because she's a charlatan who lies without any sense of moral compunction. A parasite feeding on people's superstitions. I've made it my career to expose people like her. These kinds of scammers are the reason my father ended up losing so much money, destitute and desperately believing that the woman, if she even was a woman, catfishing him, was in love with him. He believed she was planning to elope with him until he succumbed to COVID during the pandemic. Exposing the lies can't bring him back or undo the harm that was caused to our family, but it might prevent someone else from falling for a similar scheme. When I get home, I review the footage of my encounter with the make-believe woman and decide that next week I'll splice it with some footage of all her predictions not coming true. It'll make a decent short reel, I guess, though not dissimilar from other reels where I've exposed frauds. I save the footage and forget about it. 2 days later, on Friday, my brother-in-law's passing coincides with the first prediction, but his death was already foretold by the doctors, and I dismiss the coincidence for the rest of the day. I am talking to family. I console my sister, Sarah. I spend the night and check in on her every few hours. She has barely stopped crying and hasn't eaten anything. The next day, I'm still trying to console her when my phone rings. It's from an unsaved number. I don't pick up, but it rings and rings, and she tells me through tears it's fine, to please go and answer it. So I do. It is Pete, the actor. Max, rasped Pete. Max, thank God. She said she'll count you as a referral. You have to make her go away. Who? I ask. Annoyance, like an ice pick in my brain, because I already know who. Already suspect. The woman, he bursts, all but sobbing. The one in the chair. I can't believe it. This make-believe lady actually did it. She actually reached out to Pete. Paid him whatever she paid him. Not much, probably. He's an amateur actor we found on Instagram. Honestly, one of the reasons we hired him is because he came cheap. And now he's turned his shtick on me. I sigh. Yeah, very funny. Listen, I know who hired you. She said you'd say that. He bursts. She said you wouldn't believe me, but you have to. Max, you have to. Okay, look, this is inappropriate. My brother-in-law just died. I need to take care of family matters. You have to believe. Max, you're the only one who can save me. You have to believe before tonight. Call her and tell her you believe, or I hang up the phone, frustrated, and then I silence it as it immediately rings again. My sister looks up from her chair, eyes red, perplexed. Max, she asks. Who was? Nobody. Just an actor I worked with on a gig. Nothing to worry about. I sigh, looking at my silenced phone. It's still ringing. There are also pictures coming through via text and messages. Pictures from the photo shoot. All of the empty chair. Can't you see her? He keeps texting. More empty chair pictures. The man is dedicated. I'll give him that. He's a much better actor than I initially gave him credit. Probably should have paid him more. I block his number and forget about him. Forget about him, that is, until the next day. I'm helping my sister to put things away around the house. The place is a mess, and everything reminds her of Kenji. As I unpack a tote bag on the counter, I pull out a couple of chocolate bars. I ask if I can have one, and she calls from her place, listless on the couch. Yeah, I got those for you. Oh, really? Thank you. Sure. I pull a box of an herbal supplement out. My heart thumps in my chest. This is only a coincidence, I think. I clear my throat and call. What do you want me to do with this herbal concoction? Huh? Supplements for. Looks like it helps with digestion and gut health. Oh, She goes very quiet and then says, I got that for Kenji. I don't know. Oh, I don't want to ask. I don't want to. And I loathe the butterflies in my stomach, the way my throat is dry and constricted as I ask her, did you forget the bag? Huh? The herbal medicine. When you were out shopping for him, did you leave the bag? Yeah, actually. She wipes tears from her eyes. I've just been so out of it. How did you know I left it? I don't answer. My heart is hammering now as I go to my phone, search for Pete's number, try to call, but there is no answer. I turn to my sister. Maybe the cashier kept the bag by accident, I say. Maybe they set it behind the counter, so you didn't notice when you walked away. She's too distraught over Kenji to engage with me. Doesn't understand why I care about the bag. Could have been tucked behind the counter, she echoes. I cling to that thought. The make-believe woman bribed the cashier to hide the bag, and then to put items in it that my sister would normally buy. How else would the make-believe woman have known exactly what items would be in there? These scammers, I tell you, blood-sucking. It's insane the lengths they go to, but just in case, I retreat to the spare room, open my laptop, and check the footage of my recording with the make-believe woman. Check the date. She told me I had 5 days. Tomorrow will be 5. I have time. I repeat to myself, wondering why I'm being so uncharacteristically irrational when none of this is real. I paid Pete. I know he's acting. Why the fuck hasn't he called back? I call again. No answer. I go to YouTube and pull up the debauchery and debunkery video I released about Nathan, the phony medium. My heart settles as I watch it. The medium talking about his craft. This fucking fraudster. He goes on about establishing a psychic connection and how time is all wibbly-wobbly. Pretty sure he cribbed that from some sci-fi show. And as a consequence, he can see snippets from the future. It's all nonsense. I feel the comfort of the familiar, my skepticism sliding back into place. The camera shots of my house, the stage front room, the peeling wallpaper, and everything. And there's Pete, sitting on the sofa, pretending. I can't wait for him to get to the part where I call cut. And he reveals he's acting the whole time. That's what I need to see to feel better. Hello, sir. My name is Nathan, says Nathan on screen, introducing himself to Pete. I'm a spiritual medium. Your family reached out to me and asked for my services. Can you tell me some of what you've been experiencing? She's there, says Pete. Who's there? Asks Nathan the medium, while Pete the actor keeps staring and says he doesn't know her name. And then my camera, zooming in on the chair. Number. Fuck me. No. I freeze the frame. Number. What the fuck? Number. She's there, staring out at me from the screen, staring through the screen, right at the camera. The woman from the psychic reading shop. The video proceeds as normal, the same as before, exactly as we recorded. My blood is pumping so loud, I can barely hear myself think. My pulse raging, drowning out the dialogue in the video as the medium leans forward and asks what the woman is doing now. Pete says she's just sitting there. The camera pans back to the empty chair, but it's not empty. The woman is sitting in it. The camera returns to Nathan the medium as he gets up and begins performing a blessing on the room until suddenly Pete sits up straight on the sofa and announces, "She's getting up. She's laughing." My throat constricts. My heart sledgehammers my ribs so hard I think I might go into cardiac arrest. The phone camera remains trained on Pete, on his hammy acting. Only now, instead of looking hammy, he looks genuinely terrified. He really is a better actor than I gave him credit. I hear my own voice chuckling under my breath on the recording, trying not to giggle at what I evidently thought was a great performance by our actor. And then finally, my phone pans back to the chair. I scream aloud, in my room by myself, and jerk back from my laptop. The woman is standing, lurching toward the camera, toward me. She's coming closer. Pete's voice screams on the recording. I'm cowering on the floor, gasping as the woman steps nearer, nearer to the camera, her face swallowing the screen. "Cut," shouts my voice. Then everything is back to normal. The woman on the video is gone. There's only Nathan, red-faced and ashamed. As Pete and I tease him, I hear my own arrogant voice. I'm Max, host of Debauchery and Debunkery, where we used to take a shot for each lie, but quickly realized we get drunk way too fast. I slam my hand on the laptop to shut it, but then something occurs to me. If the woman was really there, if I wasn't seeing things, others must have noticed her too. I pull open the laptop again and skim the YouTube comments, all ordinary, and my heartbeat settles until I scroll to the most recent comments. Specifically, there's a bunch left by the user, Pete Hamsitup. It's the handle for our actor, and he has commented over and over, "Pete Hamsitup, I believe. Pete Hamsitup, I believe. Pete Hamsitup, I believe. Pete Hamsitup, I believe. Pete Hamsitup, I believe." I check Pete's Instagram account, the one we hired him from. His account is gone, deleted. I call Pete, and while the phone rings, "Max." The door bursts open, and my sister says, "Max, everything okay?" She's come because she heard me screaming over the video. "Can you see her?" I ask, trying not to hyperventilate, as I turn my laptop toward her, rewinding the video to just before the cut. "Can you see anyone in the chair?" "What? No, it's just an empty chair. Max, what's going on?" But I push past her without answering. I need to get home, need to get to that stage front room. "Max," my sister shouts, as I slam the door behind me. I try calling Pete again as I pull out of the driveway. His phone just keeps ringing. I call and call, then drop the phone, swearing as I nearly pancake a pedestrian. I'm so distraught. The pedestrian screams obscenities as I screech by. My phone rings again, and I pick it up wildly, wondering if it's Pete. But it's my sister, worried about me. I lie that I'm fine, running a red light and careening along residential streets, and finally screeching into my driveway. And I leap out, rushing up the front steps, through the porch, and into the stage living room area. See the chair, still empty. Thank God, everything still the same as on the day of Nathan the medium's visit. Nathan, I need to call Nathan. Nathan, I burst as the call connects. It's Max from Debauchery and Debunkery. I need you to make her stop. I pause, stammering over my next words, and grit my teeth and make myself say, I'll take down the debunk video. I'll say you were right. Just make her stop. Do you believe? Comes the tinny voice on the phone. Sure, fine. Just make her stop. If you believe, says the voice, you must publicly announce your belief before you end yourself and your channel. What? The blood in my veins turns to ice as I remember the deal, that absurd deal. If I believe, I end my channel and myself. If I don't believe, nothing happens. So Max, you'll be fine if you don't believe, says the small, rational voice in my head. If I don't believe, as long as I'm still a skeptic, But tears start into my eyes, the phone shaking in my fingers, because I'm looking at my texts and there's a new one from Pete. Hello, this is Jay on my grandfather's phone. He had a heart attack yesterday and passed away. Scrolling up to the previous text, it's just the picture he sent, over and over again, of the chair. But now, I see her. I fucking see her. And now I can't make myself unsee her. I can't. And I'm certain that when finally I see her in the flesh again and my 5 days are over, I'll end my account and myself. And oh, fuck me. How do I stop it? Please help me. I whimper into the phone. Nathan's voice cackles, only it doesn't sound like Nathan. I sink down to the floor in despair, and that's when I find it on the carpet. That matte black card of hers, black like the blackest void in the universe. Except those words, make believe, and in the picture of the eye, looking at me and the number. And I remember, she likes referrals. I still have a few hours left to find someone else, so I'm making this final post. Please, are you a skeptic? You think I'm making this all up? That it's just nonsense? That I'm I'm an actor? Perfect. Okay, please, listen, I believe, and I need you to look her up. I need you to call her. Call this number, redacted. Call her. And no matter how skeptical you are, she'll make you believe. But I beg you to do it soon. Now. Call her now. Now. I promise she'll make you believe.
The previous tenant of my new flat left a survival guide. I think I'm going to need more than a guide. So much has happened in the last 24 hours. I'm so stressed and I barely slept since I discovered that Jamie was missing. It's starting to make me feel a little twitchy, but I thought I'd better update you guys. I was overwhelmed by all the suggestions you gave me and have taken more than a few of them on board. I'm definitely going to be getting a huge planter full of sage for the balcony, and I did spill a little salt in my doorway. I'm sorry to disappoint, but that didn't help at all. There's nothing I'm following quite like Mrs. Hemming's rules. I've followed them to the letter so far, and lo and behold, I'm still alive. That's not to say it hasn't been tough. I'll start from the beginning. I was going crazy. And a few hours after my last post, Jamie still hadn't returned. He had been gone for almost 24 hours. His work have called me multiple times. I don't know what to say, so I just keep ghosting the calls. I was bang in the middle of the danger time when I decided checking the lift had to be my first step. But I wasn't going to break that rule. I waited. I waited desperately for 3:34 to come, and I'm ashamed to say that when it did, I remained paralyzed to our sofa for almost half an hour before I found the nerve to leave the flat. It was 4:02 when I finally reached the lift. The lift in this building is old and rickety. It hasn't been updated in a very long time and has likely been here as long as the building. Its big, clunky buttons stared back at me as I glared at them, hoping for some sort of answer or clue. My heart thumped and I was overcome with a feeling of dread, but nothing came of any of it. It was hopeless. I stepped inside the lift, rode it up and down a few floors, and searched the entire perimeter with a phone torch for anything I could find. I found nothing. Jamie had completely disappeared. Sobbing and exhausted, I rode back to floor 7 and turned my key in flat 42, the perfect home that felt anything but home at that point. I sat at the cheap flat-pack dining table we'd managed to put together on move-in day and cried, my hands shaking as I held my phone. I was flitting between reading all your comments and contemplating calling the police for an hour, but I decided to call my friend Georgia instead. I needed a real person here. Things were so crazy, I wasn't sure the police would be able to help with what little information I had, but I knew I needed to sound it out with someone. I'll spare you the details again, but I told her everything. She promised she'd be with me in the late morning. She had to take her younger brother to school. I waited anxiously, not before arming every room exactly as advised. Before I knew it, I looked at the clock and it was 8:23. I had around half an hour until the postman was due to show up. There was no way I was missing him today. I stood by the door looking vacantly at the wood, like someone in a film who was possessed. The exhaustion was really setting in, but Jamie was all I could think of. Pure adrenaline was keeping me standing. At 8:52, I opened the door. The next 2 minutes were the longest of my life, but when I saw him, a wave of relief swept my entire body. Right on cue, 8:54. The postman, Ian Flanders, stood in front of me, a smile that barely hid his concern covering his younger-than-expected face. He didn't look old enough to have been the postman for over 35 years, but I was too distracted by the answers that I needed from him to care. "You must be the new tenant," he stated, but in a way that it sounded like a question. I struggled with my answer, so I got straight to the point. "Mrs. Hemmings left me a note. She said to speak to you if—" "Can I come in, dear? I think we need to chat." I ushered Ian in, my hands still shaking as I flapped them in the direction of the sofa, gesturing for him to sit down. I shoved the now slightly crumpled note into his lap and waited. "I'm glad Prue still thinks that highly of me. I will miss that old girl," he said with a coy smile as he reached the end of the note. "Can you help me or not?" I had no time for his ego trip over a moved-on neighbor. "I can help, but I can't stop for long, so it'll have to be quick. I've walked these halls delivering the post for 40 years. I've seen it all, everything Prue's mentioned and more." "What do you need to know?" he said. Ian was nothing like what I expected. The note made me feel like he was going to be a kindly old granddad-type figure, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Postman Ian spoke with a thick city accent and wore a heavy gold chain around his tattooed neck. He had dyed his graying hair boot polish black. His demeanor was thankfully non-threatening, but extraordinarily cocky. He was the sort of man I imagined in a betting shop, rubbing his grubby hands on notes as he bragged over a win. He didn't ask as he lit a cigarette in my living room. I didn't question it. We would usually smoke outside, but I wasn't going to argue over technicalities. I grabbed a bowl for the ash and lit one too. "Let's start with the things in the lift. My boyfriend is missing, and he took the lift at 3:15 over 24 hours ago. We hadn't got this note yet. I haven't heard from him since. I need to get him back." I barked at him, as if the louder I spoke, the more I could influence his answer. But nothing prepared me for what he said. His skin turned pale, and his harsh-looking face became more sympathetic as he explained. "He's dead, love. Forget about him now. Only one person has ever come back from the lift at that time of night, and it was Prue herself. After witnessing it, those creatures ripping their victim apart, poor Prue was traumatized. Your boy is gone. Let go and follow the rules." He was blunt, but I could tell he felt sorry for me. "There must be something I can do," I pleaded. "There are things I've heard to bring back those who are lost, but I've never seen solid proof they work. It would be irresponsible of me to tell you to do something that might get you killed too. It's nice here, honest, just get over him and live the status quo. Sorry if I sound harsh, I don't mean to, but you seem like a decent young lady and I don't want to see you go too soon." I asked about what Mrs. Hemmings had seen in the lift, and if they were sure it happened to all who entered it. I refused to believe that Jamie was dead. There had to be something I could do, and if I knew what I was dealing with, I could be better prepared. It was awful what happened. I wasn't there, but this is what I was told. Little Lila was such a cute kid. She used to open the door and give me a tip when I delivered the post. She was Prue's granddaughter. Lila was her son's little girl, and that night she was staying over for the first time. Prue finally felt confident that she could protect Lila from all the strange things that happen here. She was wrong. Little Lila had a problem with sleepwalking, and she took a trip into the hallway at 1:30 in the morning. Prue took a little too long to notice the sound she had heard was the front door, and by the time she reached the lift, she saw the creatures dragging Lila's limbs away from her body. She tried to fight them, even killed one, but she couldn't save the little girl. I was hysterical, imagining Jamie's fate. "What are the creatures? Have you ever actually seen them?" I asked. "No one really knows what they are, love. They're something to do with the building and all its quirks. No one's ever seen them elsewhere. We don't know where they came from, just that they're here. I've seen them a few times over the years, usually when new neighbors have left biscuits down for their cats and dogs or haven't disposed of food waste properly. They're curious little creatures, mostly harmless out of the hours Prue warned you about, but if they're fed, they can become quite viscous looking for more food. That's why you have to bin all your scraps, or hide them or pack them or whatever. Just don't leave them out and don't use the lift at those times and you're safe from the creatures. They're a little smaller than humans, but they're a similar shape. They come with grotesque rodent-like features and are far larger than any rodent could be. Like rodent children, I suppose. They have 2 sharp rows of teeth per jaw and are consistently hungry. When they eat, they crunch down in a violent and disgusting way, dripping spittle everywhere. Prue said she could hear her granddaughter's bones shatter in those jaws. He went pale at the thought of that, but continued. When they first arrived in the building, there were hundreds. It caused pandemonium amongst the residents. We lost the residents of more than 30 of the individual homes, but the residents fought back and managed to kill all but the strongest minority of them. The creatures left over were incredibly dangerous and seemingly impossible to eradicate, so the residents struck a deal that they will be left unharmed and allowed to live in the building in return for the residents' safety at all times. But if anyone wanders into the lift between 1:11 and 3:33 a.m., they are fair game. This time frame is the period the creatures are at their most frenzied, and restricting them to the lift was safer for all parties. God help anyone who encounters them during those hours. They've been here ever since, claimed lots of unsuspecting people avoiding the stairs, but nothing like when they first arrived. A few got put down for not holding up their end of the bargain, but we haven't had an incident outside the lift in years. Count yourself lucky you missed that crisis. Everything here's pretty peaceful right now. I'm sorry about your boyfriend. I really have to go. I'm late for my round. He scrawled his phone number on a bit of paper and handed it to me. Emergencies only. I don't like to be bothered. You can't go. The note said you would help me, I exclaimed. And I will, he snapped back, when there's something I can help with. I can't resurrect your boyfriend, and I don't like to be late delivering the post. I will see you soon, love. I was in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, and I couldn't believe he was leaving me after the information overload and the small ray of hope he had lit inside me and then squashed. I'll call the police, I shouted, desperate to feel as if I was solving this somehow. You can try if you want. Ian sighed as he opened the door to leave. It just aggravates the creatures, and it isn't going to bring your boy back. Mr. Prentice hates it when police come too. If you want to get any sleep in the next week, then I'd avoid it. Wait a week. Report him missing and learn to adapt to life here, love, or you'll be dead in days. And with that, he shut the door behind him. I opened it again. I had so much more to ask, but he was gone. No sign of him anywhere in the corridor. Maybe it was me losing my mind. I might be imagining all these things. But no matter how much I willed it, the note was still there, and Jamie still wasn't. Georgia arrived not long after Ian had left. I, of course, asked if she had seen him in the corridor, to try and affirm to myself that he was real, but she hadn't. She looked at me worried and held me as I sobbed and told her what the postman had said about Jamie and the creatures. I wasn't sure she believed me. Even as she read the note, she looked skeptical. If she was skeptical, I wouldn't have blamed her, but she had always been supportive. She sat with me for hours while I just sobbed, heartbroken. I was so conflicted as to what to do. It felt insane that I hadn't contacted anybody, but this note had turned out to be accurate so far, and if the postman was to be trusted, then I should wait. Georgia had been my best friend for many years. She stuck up for me when I was too scared to do it for myself and had always been the brave one of the two of us. I felt safe around her, so after hours of crying and despairing at the way my life had changed in a matter of days, I finally decided to take a nap. It was early evening, and Georgia was watching some TV, just there for me if I needed her. Despite the deprivation, I struggled to fall asleep. I tried to imagine Jamie's arms around me, but it became a more painful reminder that they probably never will be again. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of staring at the damp patch on ceiling, I drifted off. About 3 hours ago, I woke up staring at the goddamn damp patch on the ceiling and could hear chatting in the living room. I jumped out of bed and walked towards it. Georgia was on the sofa with a middle-aged looking woman, both nursing a cup of tea in the matching mugs that Jamie had got me as a move-in present. My blood boiled, but it wasn't their fault. I cleared my throat to get their attention. "Oh, Katie, this is Natalia. She lives upstairs. We got chatting, so I made her a cup of tea. I hope you don't mind." I looked at the dark-haired woman on the sofa, drinking tea from my cup, and nodded. Georgia was a sociable idiot with no understanding of when to not be herself. I wasn't going to lament her for it right now. It was her coping. "Of course. Hi, Natalia. What flat do you live in?" I tried my very best to be polite. I would have to discuss not bringing people into my home mid-tragedy with Georgia after she had left, but until then, I would be neighborly. "Flat 71. It's so nice to meet you. You have a lovely home," Natalia responded, her lips curled at the corners into a smile that wasn't replicated in her eyes or the rest of her facial expression. She looked at me smugly, with full knowledge that I was aware of the implications of what she had just said. The rules, the flat number. Every now and again, someone will knock at your door claiming to live in one of these flats and ask to borrow some sugar. They will seem entirely average, but you must shut and lock the door immediately. I installed 2 extra security bolts to avoid these fuckers. I don't like to swear at my age, but they really are fuckers. Prue's warning echoed in my mind, and I couldn't take my eyes off Natalia. Something really was off about her. I looked at Georgia sat on the sofa next to her and noticed her sweating. Anyone in the UK knows that it's been a hot for few days, but this was beyond just the ambient temperature. Her entire body was dripping. Suddenly she began to pant. Natalia's eyes were locked to mine, just like the window cleaner's had been. Nothing happened before with the cleaner, except this time the rule had been broken. She was already in the flat. Georgia started to scream as her skin blistered and charred. Her hair fell from her scalp as the skin flaked and melted away from every inch of her. She was being burned alive without a flame in sight. She scratched frantically at her own melting face, digging into the exposed raw flesh. The sound a person makes when they burn alive is like no other. That will never leave me. I screamed and screamed, but no one came to my door. I tried to grab my phone to call Postman Ian, but the wooden surface I had set it down on burned my fingers to the touch and forced me to recoil. She was going to set the whole flat alight. My actions needed to be quicker than a phone call. I grabbed hold of the large knife I had set down on the side earlier when weaponizing. The handle blistered my fingers instantly, but I didn't care. I needed to get her out now and help Georgia if I could. I ran towards the dark-haired lady, sweat dripping from my brow the closer I got, and plunged the knife into Natalia's throat. She gripped it and fell to the floor. She didn't bleed like a normal human. Her insides were black. She was still moving, and I figured it probably wouldn't be long before she stood right back up and tried again. So I dragged her into the hallway, ready to bolt the door. As we reached the entrance of the corridor, one of the cats was waiting, hissing at her semi-conscious body. I caught her eyes fixate on it as I dumped her on the floor. I grabbed the cat, pulled him inside, wincing as its skin caused more burns up my lower arms, shut the door and watched through the peephole. She got up and held her hand to the wound, cauterizing it and walking off towards the lift. As if she hadn't been injured at all. I'd dropped the cat by that point, but every bit of naked skin it had touched throbbed and burned for at least an hour. Georgia hadn't been as lucky as Natalia with injury recovery. I anonymously called an ambulance for her. I couldn't believe it, but she was still breathing. She was badly burned, and her life wouldn't be the same again, but she was alive. And for that I was grateful. It sounds awful, but I left her at the park across the road from the building. With no phone or ID, she's my best friend and I want to be there. But if I own up to involvement in injuries that bad, they'll suspect me. And I lose the already slim chance that Jamie might be savable. It doesn't mean I don't care about Georgia, but she's alive. I won't believe Jamie isn't until I see it. So now I'm alone again, in the flat, conflicted about what to do. I want to leave. So badly. But this was mine and Jamie's first home together. If he's alive and I can save him, then I want it to be here for him to come back to. And if he's dead, and the postman is right, then I don't know if I can leave his memory behind. There's only one person I think could help me right now. So tonight I'm going to do some research, hunt down an address, and tomorrow morning I'm going to visit Prudence Hemmings. The previous tenant of my new flat left a survival guide. Things just keep getting weirder. When I first saw Natalia, all I could picture was Georgia. The way her skin melted off her face, the smell of her hair burning, and the sound that she made. I didn't have time to count, but there were more than I originally thought. I figured these must have been the 15 people Prudence talked about entering the flats that burned before it happened. I already knew that Natalia was one of them. Eddie and Ellie clutched Terry's skirt, trembling with fear. I wanted to help protect them, but I still couldn't help but tremble a little myself every time I caught a glimpse of those hollow voids where their eyes were. "Hi, Terry. The kid said we could borrow some sugar?" she asked menacingly, grinning at the frightened family stood next to me. After a moment or two of intense staring, Natalia finally addressed me. She appeared to be the spokesperson for the group. "How's your friend doing? It was a shame we had to end our visit. I was enjoying her company." "Don't speak about her! She's got nothing to do with you, you sick bitch!" I screamed at her. I couldn't bear looking at her face again. "You don't scare me with all your freak friends. I'm not going to let you hurt this lady or her kids." Natalia chuckled. I gulped. I may talk a good game, but I am no hero. Mere days ago I was just a young girl excited to move in with her boyfriend, and now here I am. My boyfriend's dead, my flat is like living in my own personal horror movie, and I'm standing up challenging demonic flame neighbors to defend demonic-looking children. But when I said she didn't scare me, I meant it. Something inside me was eradicating any fear of these people. I just wanted to protect the residents. Life really does throw curveballs. "I know you aren't scared. I saw it in your eyes when you stuck that big knife in my throat. That's why we're here. My brothers and sisters are not freaks. You're the freaks, thinking that your lives have meaning. We watch you people go about your day-to-day lives and your mundane routines, and nothing really changes. Your lives are pointless and disposable. That's why we set the fire all those years ago." She chuckled throughout her words. There was an animation in them, like she was a psychotic cartoon character, finally catching its prey after 138 episodes of chasing. "Those people weren't disposable," Terry mumbled, barely a decibel higher than a whisper. "What was that, Terry? Did you have something to say?" Natalia went from psychotic cartoon to school bully. She made my skin crawl. "I was only a child, but those people were friends of my parents. They were good people," Terry said with slightly more confidence. None of the other people had moved. They just stood there staring. "Why would you burn people alive? What can you possibly gain?" I interjected, taking a slight step between Natalia and Terry and the kids. I could see she was getting ready to go for them, and I couldn't let it happen. We were living with the great leader, Michael. All of us. Living in the righteous manner that he had directed us to live. She gestured to the people around her. The name Michael appeared to inspire some sort of emotion in the group. "Michael's brother Jonathan lived here. On the floor we burned. He let us hang out there sometimes, but he didn't live the righteous way that we did. He didn't like our beliefs, but he took us in when we lost the place we were staying because of the growth of the group. Him and Michael rarely saw eye to eye. They argued passionately. Our group never believed in living within the constraints of societal norms, and we were up at all hours. We came and went as we pleased, embracing freedoms and listened to music as we did introspective work. Terry shoved the kids further behind her and snapped, infuriated. You were a group of entitled bratty hippies following some middle-aged, mentally ill twat. Listen to yourself. The stereotypical cultish drivel coming out of your mouth right now, Terry cried. I was shocked at her outburst. Although I couldn't have agreed more. It did sound like cultish drivel. It made me so angry that this was what an entire floor of people died over. As Terry ended her rant, the curtains hanging on the window behind her burst into flames. I jumped and felt my heart skip a beat. Don't insult us. I'm sick of hearing simple-minded people call us a cult. Came from the back row. An average-looking man with dark hair and jeans had piped up, smiling and watching the curtains burn. He had done that. They were all capable of what Natalia had done to Georgia at the very least. For the first time since the people had entered Terry's flat, my nerves of steel had wavered. I realized that we were only alive because they were allowing it so far. We were in big trouble. Terry swiftly shut up, and Natalia continued her story. Michael was the true leader, not like all the fakes you hear of in the news, the people you're talking about. He was teaching us to build a world of peace and harmony, but he didn't deny that in order to do that, you had to eradicate the non-believers. He taught us to embrace the bad in us, to harness it so that we could do extraordinary things. She smiled wickedly, as her hands glowed hot coals as she spoke. It may have sounded like cultish drivel, but Michael being a total faker wouldn't explain their powers. Things went wrong when someone went to the police after Michael and Jonathan had a terrible argument one night. When the police arrived, Jonathan told us to go. The group had been planning to leave this building anyway. We'd had nothing but interruption and trouble in our time here. This place is weird, but we had nowhere immediate to go. The police already disliked us after overcrowding the last property. We didn't need any more attention. Michael was furious. We brainstormed in a field for hours who could have done it. I personally suspected the next-door neighbor, Mavis. The woman was so nosy, always knocking and asking us to keep noise down, interrupting our spiritual sessions. Michael couldn't make a certain judgment on the person who had done it. All we thought we were sure of was that they had to be on the same floor. So he instructed us to go back that night and eradicate the whole floor and every non-believer who lived there. As you know, we obliged. This incited sick laughter from the crowd. I waited, forcing myself to let her finish, buying time. We took pleasure in their screams, in watching every man, woman, and child go up in flames through their front door windows. It was the first time we'd unleashed all that energy, and we felt so powerful. But then as we left the burning hallway behind us and entered the stairwell, this building found a way to fuck us over one more time. I couldn't give you a number on the amount of times we tried to run down those stairs, leave our glorious victory behind us and return to Michael. It didn't matter how many times we tried. We couldn't make it past that floor. The stairs wouldn't let us. It didn't take long before the fire reached the stairwell we were trapped in, burning us all, along with the non-believers. We died just in time for the fire engine to arrive. We may have been dead, but we didn't disappear. We couldn't leave the building. We were stuck just wandering it, in and out of the burned flats and hallways, but not allowed anywhere else unless we were asked. It was awful. We didn't try to cause any trouble at first. We waited for Michel to come and find us, instruct us. 2 months passed and he hadn't come. Instead came confirmation. A newspaper put through the door of the building. Headline news: Tower Block resident Bernie Hemmings information vital to imprisonment of local cult leader on drug charges. I gasped. I couldn't believe I hadn't found that when I was researching Prue. But I suppose local news wasn't so heavily online back then. Natalia saw my shocked expression and grinned wider than before. The old bat didn't tell you that then? She asked, although it wasn't really a question. That her stupid husband is the whole reason we're here. We started to really cause issues then. Did anything within our power to fuck the whole building over. But it didn't take them long to work out that we had to be asked to come in. We only stopped when Prue worked out a way we could die a second time and that we wound come back again. She killed 2 of our group. She was the only person that could stop us. We couldn't do shit with her around. We stopped and reached a stalemate. Then she moved out. We were going to honor that stalemate. Until you stabbed me. Prue's gone. It's fair game in here now. As Natalia got angrier, a member of her group started getting agitated. They all soon followed like a hive mind. Working as one, the stillness became chaotic, with all of them moving and making noise. I didn't notice at first when one started walking towards Terry and the kids, but I noticed when it got near. It was a teen girl, slender and pretty, but still unsettlingly average. As she got within a meter of the family, Ellie suddenly went rigid. The claws that replaced her fingernails grew longer and sharper, with jagged edges from growing so fast. The voids deepened, if that was even possible. She opened her mouth to reveal rows of sharp teeth, blood caked where the tooth meets the gum where they had grown too quickly as well. Ellie jumped. She reached out towards the girl and slashed her face with the claws, leaving deep gouges across her eyes. She clung on to the girl using her claws as wall pegs, keeping herself at eye level. Eddie controlled the crowd. His own claws grew and he ran towards them, sending them scattering out of the flat. Random bursts of flames erupted everywhere, lighting up the whole room. Shit had hit the fan. The two demon children were successfully fending off a group of 15 dead superhuman cultists. Natalia ran from them too, but kept her eyes locked on mine as she did. As she ran from the flat, she spoke to me. "This isn't over," she screamed, and I knew that it wasn't. I stayed on Terry's sofa that night. We organized all the burned items in the house and threw things out before we crashed out in the early hours. The kids' claws retracted and they returned to their earlier state, causing mischief in the hallways. They were too young to really understand. I didn't sleep much, nothing new. When I woke up, Terry was still asleep. I didn't want to disturb her, so I walked back to my flat, desperate to avoid anything strange on my way. The stairs must have noticed because they didn't skip on my way up. I hadn't checked the time when I left Terry's, but I reached my door at the same time as a familiar face. Postman Ian was stood there, dropping letters on my doorstep. "Hey, love," he shouted as he noticed me. "I need to talk. Can you come inside just 5 minutes, please?" I practically begged him at the doorstep. I told him everything that had happened the night before, how Natalia was out for revenge and I was the object of her rage. I begged him to tell me how to kill them, but he claimed he didn't know. He said if kept my doors locked and didn't let them in, then I'd be fine. He looked shirty as I mentioned killing them, didn't even suggest asking Prudence how to do it. Something was telling me there wasn't much point. He seemed so disingenuous. I wanted to trust him. So badly I wanted to trust him. I had been so vulnerable with him over Jamie. But if Prudence Hemmings could forget to mention what Bernie had done, and conveniently never pass on the method to kill these awful people, leaving them around to terrorize her friends and neighbors, then could she be a liar too? Could I really trust Ian? When he provided no answers and no real help, something inside me told me that I needed to get him out of my flat. I needed to rethink, start working things out on my own. I made excuses to Ian and sent him on his rounds. Prudence left me these rules, but she left so much out. How do I know I wasn't always a pawn in some sick game? Her fantasy life as a puppet master, setting me up to fail. She's kept her granddaughter in a cage for years. Maybe she enjoys suffering. I wasn't going to give up easily, though. Natalia wasn't going to win. I decided then and there that I needed to attend the committee meeting today and start building an army against Natalia. I didn't need Prue's help or her methods. With enough manpower, I could do it myself. This was war. The previous tenant left a survival guide. The flat isn't new anymore, and I need a better guide. It's been a long time since I moved into this apartment, picked up that damn note from the tenant before me, and unlocked a world of demon window cleaners and vile rat-like creatures that live in the communal lift. If you don't know me, my name is Kat, and months ago I found myself living in a home filled with unusual occurrences. You can start here if you want to know more. If any of you do remember me, I'm back again, begging for your help. I don't even really know how to begin this, but I think I owe you all an apology. You warned me, gave me advice, and tried to stop me from making the biggest damn mistake of my life. I didn't listen. Instead, I let my emotional immaturity get the better of me. I really wish I'd listened. I'm sorry I ghosted you all. I was embarrassed. I know I disappeared without a word, and for that I really am sorry. I can't blame any of you for comparing me to Prudence. The events following my moving into the block had me in such an emotional place. You have to understand, it was a lot to take in. No one can be truly equipped to live somewhere like this. It was bound to catch up with me eventually. The months since I last updated you have been hellish, and now I've found myself in further trouble. It wasn't long after my last post that I caught Jamie. I enticed him into the flat with cat food left out by the door. I ran the risk of being mauled alive by the remaining lift creatures to capture my monstrosity of a boyfriend. He was smaller than I thought. I expected him to be much larger than Lila because of the age difference, but he wasn't. Maybe as big as a large dog. Something I missed about Jamie more than anything was his once huge stature. An odd quality to consider, I know. But he was 6'3", and his cuddles felt like the safest place I'd ever been. Looking at the small, deformed, humanoid creature, hunched over, crunching on cat biscuits with its sharp, jagged teeth, tucked under a grotesque rodent nose, made me feel sick. I instantly knew that I'd made a mistake, that the love of my life was gone for good. But that thing had Jamie's eyes. They were unmistakable. Suddenly, Prudence's need to keep Lila around made sense. I could see an entire life in those eyes that had been ripped away from me, and I was too selfish to let it go. I suppose in that respect I'm exactly like her, exactly what you all think, a monster. I fashioned a place to keep him hidden in the large, built-in wardrobe of our bedroom. It wasn't like Lila's cage was, cold and restrictive. It had space, lights, and photos of us before everything happened. It was like a walk-in wardrobe. Ironically, it was something that originally attracted me to the flat. The only similarity to Lila's tiny cage was the large padlock that secured it. I tried everything to bring that little piece of Jamie left inside the creature out. I really did. I sat with him for hours, talking about our lives, reminiscing and trying to feed him his favorite meals. He would make awful, raspy noises when I spoke to him at first, grunting and wheezing as if he were struggling to breathe. I received more than a few bites and scratches, and he refused to eat anything that I gave him, opting for scraps instead. I thought about killing him. A lot. It's a position I never thought I'd be in when we were searching for a home together, and at some point I realized I consider it daily. I've come close to attempting it more than a few times, but every time I look at those damn eyes, I can't. I'm weak. So I've tried to cope. I've taken the best care of him that I can. I've gotten involved with my neighbors. I babysat Terry's twins twice a week at her place while she slept, and I'm actively involved in the residence committee. I never told anyone what I did, aside from all of you. There's only two people I feel I could admit my mistakes to. One was locked in my wardrobe, whilst the other was seemingly gone forever. Despite this, I kept the garden immaculate in the hope that one day Derek would return, and it kept me sane. I even managed to revive one of the shrubs that Prudence tried to butcher during her attack, but no matter how much love I gave, it just wouldn't flourish, and the bench remained empty. All this whilst I kept my deepest shame in my bedroom cupboard. Regardless of all the anguish this place has brought me, there's nowhere else in the world I would consider home anymore. I've never felt more connected to a place in my life. So I've stayed, I've coped, and I kept busy. The tower block may be special, and its residents may often live in another world, but we weren't completely immune to the outside. Government lockdown hit us recently too. With lockdown came the loss of routine as we knew it. The whole building went into chaos, and I was no exception. Being trapped in the flat with him all day undid months' worth of self-distraction and denial in a matter of hours. I'd never been more aware of what an abhorrent thing I'd done than those first few weeks. The other residents were going through their own crises. Terry hadn't slept in weeks. We FaceTimed regularly, and I missed her and the kids terribly. Every time I spoke to her, she looked awful. There was wailing at night, banging at all hours of the day, and a whole building's worth of inhabitants struggling. When they deemed window cleaning non-essential, it sent that particular pest into chaos. He still appeared on the balconies, but instead of the relentless niceties, he just scratched desperately at the window. I tried not to open the curtains I finally got round to buying a few months ago. I couldn't take his pleading eyes. The residence committee tried to put things in place to keep the block going. We were running Zoom meetings, and a number of us started collecting essentials for the elderly and vulnerable residents of our floors, having socially distanced chats with them from the corridor as we drop off. To be honest, it was as much a lifeline for me as the elderly residents. Anything to get out of the flat, away from him. I was allocated 3 residents from my floor living in flats 48, 51, and 43. Percy and Sylvia live in flat 43. They're next door to me and generally very pleasant. Sylvia has a breathing problem, so they had to isolate. They're older but very independent. Most of the time they just needed a few essentials and didn't want to chat. Mr. Prentice from flat 48 was easy too. He'd been an intensely private man since I'd known him, and lockdown hadn't changed that. He did seem to make more of the animalistic noises I'd come to know him for, but I think being trapped inside would do that to anyone with his particular afflictions. Since he trampled Prudence, I'd been much more tolerant of the sounds anyway. The only thing I really learned about him from doing his shopping is that he loves a drink, and there's often a bottle of whiskey in the bag he carries home with his newspaper inside. Once a week he asked me to drop off an envelope of cash to the pub he drinks in, the Pickled Gnome. He said that the owner is a good friend, and he worries about her getting by financially with the pub shut at the moment. It warmed my heart. He's such a lovely man. Flat 51 was different from the other 2. I hadn't ever met the occupant, despite having lived here for almost a year now. I'd seen a young man going in and out occasionally, but he never stayed long. The flat was occupied by Miss Esther Beckman, a blind elderly widow. The man visiting was her son, who had his own profoundly disabled child and couldn't support his mother through the pandemic. The first time I knocked on her door, I was nervous. I wasn't sure why, I just felt uncomfortable trying to help someone I knew nothing about. I knocked and stood back. It took a few moments for Miss Beckman to answer. Esther had wild, grayed hair. She hadn't cut it like most older ladies tend to. She'd allowed it to grow, and it had formed spectacular waves. She was well presented, and I'm embarrassed to say I didn't expect that from a blind person. She wore a satin blue dressing gown over the top of a white day dress and had a pair of comfortable-looking slippers on that perfectly matched the color of her dressing gown. "Are you the girl Molly phoned about?" I told her I'm fine, but the interfering old bat insisted. She greeted me with rummaging in the pocket of her dressing gown for a packet of cigarettes. I watched her open the pack and light the last one. Her brash attitude didn't put me off. I liked people with a bit of tenacity, and I wasn't particularly fond of the Residence Committee's chairperson, Molly Thompson, either. "I'm Kat, although I'm sure Molly will have referred to me as Catherine, not my name, by the way. Anyway, I'm happy to pick up anything that you need, and I'm here if you just want to chat." I stumbled a little as I spoke. Esther laughed. "See? Even interfering in something as personal as your name. I never liked that woman." She paused and took a few drags of her cigarette, hesitating before she continued. "I don't need much. If you could grab me a pack of cigarettes and a microwave meal every day, I'm fine. I don't like to ask, but my son can't come, and without a smoke, I think I'd go potty." She took another long drag of her cigarette and reached into her pocket to pull out some change and a 20-pound note. She winced a little as she asked for help. It clearly wasn't something she was used to. "Throw me the packet so I know which brand to get," I answered. Esther threw me the empty carton after shoving her money inside, and I barely caught it. She smoked the same brand I did, so I reached into my pocket and pulled out 3 or 4 individual cigs and tossed them back. They hit the floor. Shit. She's blind, I thought, mortified. "There's a few cigs on the floor in front of you." "Sorry." I didn't think. "But they're the same as yours. They should keep you going until I get back." As I said that, she smiled properly for the first time. "You're all right, aren't you? Thanks. Before you go, just a bit of advice for you. Take the route through the park instead of round." She answered. I thought it was strange, but everything in the tower was. I told her that I would and said my goodbyes. The stairs that constantly skipped weren't kind to me that trip. The 7 flights became 18, and by the time I reached the bottom, my thighs were burning. I exited the building and thought about Esther's suggestion. The route around the park was quicker, but I decided a pleasant wander through the trees would only keep me away from Jamie for longer. So without any further hesitation, I took her advice. My legs were sore from the stairs, but it was a beautiful day. About halfway through the park, I heard a loud crash and the screeching of car tires, followed by screaming. I sped up, and when I finally reached the exit, I turned the corner towards the shop and the source of the noise. It was utter carnage. A car had slammed into a motorbike at a zebra crossing and caused a devastating accident. Crowds gathered, with multiple people on the phone to emergency services. I was shaken entering the shop. I couldn't stop thinking about the poor people involved in the crash. Esther's words echoed in my mind as I thought about the fact that had I taken the usual route, I would have probably been crossing at the crash site as it happened. The realization that Ms. Beckman's suggestion had saved my life sent my mind into overdrive. I know that many of you think I learned nothing from my experiences moving into the block, but I did learn that there are no coincidences here. She had known exactly what was going to happen. I left the shop and chose to go back through the park. I was leaving nothing to chance, but it frustrated me that I couldn't get back home quicker. When I reached the building, I flung the main door open and started to climb the stairs. They must have sensed my urgency, because they only made me climb 4 flights this time. I stared at the numbers on the flat door. 51. Why had I never met her before? Why had she been hiding in her flat? I placed the shopping bag close to the door, rapped hard on it with my knuckles, and shouted, "Ms. Beckman." A few moments passed. I knocked again. "Give me a chance to open the door, Kat. And please, it's Essie. Or would you prefer I called you Catherine?" She opened the door and replied, scoffing as she said Catherine. "How did you know?" I demanded. "Know what?" "You know what? You saved my life. The crash." "I didn't save your life. I knew that if you walked around the park, you'd be in trouble. I had no idea there would be a crash. I just made a suggestion. You saved your own life when you took it," she said flippantly. "So you can see the future?" I asked, desperate for answers. "Don't you dare. Blind woman. Second sight. My whole life, the residents of this block have tried to reduce me to a walking cliché, and I'm not doing it anymore. I don't see anything. I've been blind since birth. I've just always had a particularly accurate instinct." She spoke with passion. I could see why she locked herself away. If the other residents knew about her talents, I'm sure she was hounded. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you. I haven't been here long. These things still surprise me. Thank you for sharing your instinct. I would have been squished if you didn't." "Well, I'm glad you weren't." She reached down and picked up the shopping bag, taking out the packet of cigarettes to open and light one. "Thanks for this," she said, rustling the bag with her fingers. "What flat do you live in?" "Number 42, I answered. Essie beamed. "Ha. I overheard someone saying that the old witch was dead, but I wasn't sure I believed them. I thought Prudence Hemmings would ride out a nuclear apocalypse like the cockroach she was." I cringed at the sound of her name. I try not to think about her too much, or what she put me through. I try to focus on what I love about the block. Essie could tell she struck a nerve. "Did I hit a sore point?" She continued, noting my discomfort. "I wasn't a fan of Prudence either. The idea of her coming back with cockroach antennae in the night will keep me awake now," I answered, trying to lighten the mood. "You're funny. If Antenna would have benefited that woman, she'd have done anything to grow them. It's nice to have some young blood in this place. It was all starting to get a bit old and stale. Take care, Kat." We said our goodbyes and she closed the door. That night, I thought about Essie. I imagined introducing her to the twins. I was sure she would love them. And I thought of trying to get her involved in the block again when all this was over. It made me smile. Unfortunately, my happy thoughts were soon interrupted by Jamie. I sat on my bed with a cup of tea and could hear him from the cupboard, scratching and wheezing. I went and opened it up to stroke him a few times. Saliva dripped from his sharp teeth down his deformed jaw. It disgusted me. I shut my eyes and tried to imagine my once gorgeous boyfriend, arms round me on the mattress on the floor of the flat for the one night that we got to spend here together. I wished every day to go back to that, but it would never happen. When I opened my eyes, there he was, that monster. I got close to Essie over those first few weeks. I got her cigarettes and a microwave meal every day, and we chatted at the door. After a few days, I was taking my morning cup of tea to sit in the corridor and talk to her. I started making enough food for two so that she could have something home-cooked. She hated my lasagna, but she was grateful. She had lost her husband young, not long after she had her son, and never dated again. Her life was fascinating. She'd spent years as a social worker before she retired. She said that her instinct helped her give great advice to her clients, and she'd managed to help a lot of people out of bad situations. Essie may have been older, but she was full of life. I asked her why I never saw her, why she never came to committee meetings or got involved. As I suspected, she'd grown sick of the whole block hounding her for predictions about their lives. She told me that once Molly had begged her to tell her the gender of her unborn grandchild before the child's mother had found out so that she could hold it over her. It sounded like it got intense. People were offering to pay for the winning lottery numbers or the bank details of Bill Gates. They didn't want to listen when she tried to tell them that it wasn't how it worked. So she kept a distance, saw her son, and that was about it. It made me sad. I vowed that even after this lockdown was over, I was going to keep spending time with Essie. I didn't want to think of anyone hauled up at home all the time without anyone to talk to. I told Terry about her, and she remembered Essie being friends with her parents while she was growing up. Terry told me she'd been a resident forever. I dropped Essie's shopping at the door and sat down in the corridor to chat as usual one afternoon. We spoke about music and her love of jazz. It was pleasant. Just before I left, she stopped me and told me that she had an instinct that she needed to tell me about. It was unusual. She didn't like to share them, and I didn't like to pester, but she insisted it was important. Kat, one of your friends needs help. You need to know that it is possible. It won't be easy, but if you look hard enough, you will find a way. That was all she said. She claimed it was all she knew, but I think Essie liked to hold things back sometimes. Either way, it was cryptic and confusing. I lamented her for it. That's all you're giving me? What am I supposed to do with that? I quizzed her. Haven't got a fucking clue, she replied, lighting yet another cigarette. I got an instinct, and I told you. What more do you want? There's others in this block that would kill for one of Essie Beckman's famous instincts. She laughed and flipped her wild hair mockingly. I sat in the corridor outside hers for a while, even after she closed the door. I thought about what her instinct could mean. When I finally gathered up the stomach to enter my flat, I thought of Jamie. What if it meant I could help him? What if what I'd done was reversible? What if there was hope? Or maybe it meant that killing him really was the only way I could help him, and if I looked at myself hard enough, I'd finally find the strength to follow through. I struggled to sleep that night despite trying to go to bed early. Every scratch, wheeze, and gasp from the cupboard sent me bolt upright, and it took until just after 1 a.m. before I finally drifted off. When I woke in the morning, I had 5 missed calls from Terry, 2 from 3 a.m., and 3 from that morning. My heart dropped. The kids. I knew Ellie had been going through a stage of trying to get out of the flat, and I was terrified something had happened to her. I could barely hold the phone as I dialed back. Thankfully, she answered quickly. Terry, are you okay? What's happened? Are the kids okay? I practically screamed at her down the microphone. Categoria, I'm fine. We're fine. But I have to tell you something. Terry was serious. She was never serious. What is it? Last night, Ellie got out. She made it all the way up to your floor to try and visit you by the time I caught up with her. As I was about to march her downstairs, I spotted something. It's Ms. Beckman, Kat. She was walking into the lift. Her words cut into my soul. I let out a gentle sob. I'm sorry, Kat. I tried to stop her. I screamed her name, but she didn't turn. She just walked in. I couldn't do any more. I had Ellie there, and when I checked the time, it was 2:15. I'm so sorry. And that's where this predicament begins, in an ironically similar place to before, with me mourning the loss of a loved one to the lift. The previous tenant left a survival guide. Never take the sunlight for granted. Derek and I stared at Ellie in silence. It wasn't a stare of horror, more of sheer disbelief. I couldn't be more grateful that she had saved our lives. What remained of Albert on the floor wasn't a source of alarm. Despite his extended life, she had ripped him into enough pieces that if he had survived, he couldn't speak and must have been in unbelievable pain. Just like the residents he tortured for years. It would have been a cruel irony, and I almost half hoped he hadn't truly died, as sick as that may sound. "Are you okay?" I asked Ellie. She had shrunken and morphed back into a smaller demonic child, something that I felt a need to protect, despite the fact she didn't need anyone to do so. "I'm fine," she answered, head still hung as if she were ashamed. There was a pause for a moment. "Thank you, sweetheart. We'd all be dead without you." Derek chipped in, his normal calm and positive tone restored. Ellie lifted her head and smiled as he recognized her for the hero she was. It wasn't that I didn't feel the same, it's just that the shock was overwhelming. "We need to help another friend now, honey. Do you want to grab Kat and come with me?" Ellie wrapped her clawed hand in mine as I clutched Derek's blood-soaked tweed cap with the other. She looked at me with love, just like she had at the beginning of this nightmare. The cold atmosphere of the floors below that we stood in had been reduced to a pile on the ground, just like Albert. We walked towards flat -51. Every step felt wobbly, like those few steps after a really spinny ride at the fair. I struggled to put one foot in front of the other. Derek dropped to where Essie lay squirming and put a gentle hand over her chest, carefully avoiding the splintered rib bones that stuck out. "I'm so sorry," he said to her as he shut his eyes, leant down and kissed her bloodied forehead. The shards of bone that decorated her entire body started to move and rearrange. She squealed in pain as her skin started to cauterize over the newly repositioned bone and innards. Her twisted limbs started to resemble something human again. I felt tears rolling down my face. Once she was as close to her usual herself as she was going to get, Derek took a step back as she opened her eyes, that had returned to the hollowed sockets, and looked directly at me. Essie was blind. She had always been blind, but she knew that I was there. We held her gently as the three of us helped her to her sofa, an exact replica of the one upstairs, placing each bruised limb into position as carefully as we could. The bruises shone purple and green underneath the harsh artificial lighting, reminding me that we weren't really home. "Cat," she struggled to speak. Her jaw hadn't quite relocated the whole way. I knew what she wanted, though. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a slightly bloody cigarette. Essie reached out with broken fingers and held it to her lips as best she could as I put down the flat cap and lit it for her. "Come on, sweetheart, we're going to stand in the other room," Derek said to Ellie as he ushered her into the hallway and away from the smoke, leaving me alone with Ms. Beckman. "I'm sorry, Essie," I started. She tried to reply, but she could barely make a sound. "You were right, though. He did need help. Now no one in the block is going to go through what you have anymore. I'm sorry I couldn't save you." Essie puffed on the cigarette with great difficulty. She could barely close her lips around it, but she persisted, with a glint in her eye that indicated this was the first pleasure she'd enjoyed in quite some time. She grunted a strained no at me. "Ellie did it. I can finally take her home now. I just wish that we could take you and Derek with us." I lit my own cigarette and took a long draw from it. "You can, no, not me. Go home, go home," she managed, every word leaving a trail of pain in her face. I cringed. Despite her better appearance, she wasn't fixed. She was in as much pain as she had been before. I smiled at her, just to try and make her feel a little normal. "Speaking in fucking riddles again, Essie?" I responded, trying to muster a laugh through the tears that continued to fill my eyes. She looked directly at me again, and I knew that she had been serious. We finished our smoke in silence as I wept and she wheezed. "Derek!" I shouted after a few more minutes with her, encouraging him back into the flat. Him and Ellie appeared within seconds. He took one look at me, nodded with tears in his eyes too, and he knew what to do. I got up from the sofa and pulled Ellie in for a hug, careful to avoid her horns, making sure that she faced me. Then I watched over her shoulder as he delicately closed Essie's eyelids, and the wheezing stopped. I held in a sob and clutched my young friend as tightly as I could. Derek walked towards us and put his arms around the both of us for a moment in silent mourning before stepping back. Ellie looked up at me, a knowing in her voids, and she spoke. "I want to go home now, Kat." Her words broke what was left of my resolve. The sobbing began and Derek put his hand on my shoulder. He started to walk us out of the hallway, and as we reached the mess on the floor that had once been Albert, outside the door of flat -42, I came to a sudden stop. "No further. We need to go in there," I said, directing them into the open door of my anti-flat. Derek tried to speak and protest, but I stopped him the moment he opened his mouth. "Please, just trust me." I wasn't angry or frantic like before, and I think that he knew I wasn't trying to lead us into more trouble. I recognized that I'd probably done enough of that to last a lifetime. Essie hadn't led me astray before. Her advice had been sound. I'd taken a few detours, but I got to the right place eventually. If I were to respect her death, then I had to follow the last bit of advice she gave out. The flat was familiar. My sofa, fold-out table, and kitchen were all there, identical to the ones I'd spent so much time at. The flat was windowless, the sole indication in my confusion that I wasn't truly home. I pulled back the curtains of the balcony doors to reveal thick concrete behind them. It was sad, really, but I almost longed to see the window cleaner tapping on the glass and begging to be let in. I would trade his persistent harassment for my current predicament in a heartbeat. I felt my face sink. Whatever Essie had wanted me to see here wasn't as clear as I'd hoped. I should have anticipated that it wouldn't be easy. Derek and Ellie stood in silence as I inspected every inch of the place, even down to an equally smashed copy of the prison I had kept Jamie in. Frustrated, I eventually looped back into the living room, prepared to walk out the front door and follow Derek to the basement entrance, where he would leave us again. The prospect of going through all that, for him to remain trapped in these layers, was more disheartening than anything I'd felt before. Then I saw the light. It wasn't a eureka moment, or some sort of religious epiphany. It was an actual physical light. It wasn't artificial like the one that had plagued our stay in the Undertower. It was real, and it was coming from the sun. "How?" Derek uttered in wonder as his eyes fixed on the grate that had appeared at the top of the concrete, behind the sliding balcony doors. The sun flooding in lit up his whole face and electrified his kind eyes. The opening looked just the same as it had the night I found the kittens, but from the other side, its appearance was all the more poignant. Who would have thought that metal bars could signify such freedom? When it first appeared, I had never imagined that something other than a basement could exist beneath the block. "Thank you, Essie." I looked up at the ceiling and imagined her smile as it had been before Albert had got to her. She knew she couldn't be saved, but she made sure Derek didn't have to stay. And I knew that in her death, she wouldn't have to suffer again. The grate was just large enough for a person to fit through with enough of a squeeze, and I could almost make out the shrubbery me and the twins had planted. "See? You're coming too!" I grinned at Derek with the first bit of true joy I'd felt in quite some time. He didn't protest this time, or argue at all. He smiled back and just said two simple words. "Thank you." I pulled open the sliding door and Ellie, who had been stood to the side, climbed the curtain with her claws as quickly as possible. I was amazed and grateful that she didn't pull them down. I watched in awe as she wrenched the bars away from the concrete and uninterrupted sunlight poured into the lower flat. The sunlight bathed us all, and Ellie dropped to the ground the same time as her claws and horns began to retract. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment the voids disappeared, but they did. There she was, mess of blonde hair on her head and brown puppy dog eyes looking at us as she hit the ground with a thud. A little girl you wouldn't suspect more than a tantrum of replaced the ferocious beast that had protected me through this hellish landscape. The front door that led to the hallway where Albert's remains laid had suddenly been replaced by a thick blank wall, just as the lift that brought us here had been. All that remained was the flat, the three of us, and the open grate. I pulled one of the chairs from the fold-out table below it and turned to Derek. "You first, so you can pull us out." He was busy staring at the newly transformed girl. There was a guilt in his eyes, and he looked at Ellie more strangely than he had when she was demonic. Regardless, the connection was still there. I handed him the flat cap, still soaked in blood, and he placed it onto his head with a genuine smile. He looked himself again with it in place as he took a step onto the chair. Before climbing out, he turned to us and winked. He wriggled through the grate with some difficulty and reached his hands back through. I watched Ellie's tiny clawless hand clutch his fingerless one as he hoisted her through the gap. Left alone in the flat, I took another look at my surroundings and took a moment to consider all the pain beneath the block. I imagined a life where Ellie hadn't come with me, and I was trapped for good or dead at the hands of the rat creatures. As I burst through the small gap, pulled by both Derek and Ellie, the bright sun and sensation of the shrubs in my hair as I crawled through them felt like a rebirth. The garden was stunning. Dewdrops littered the green foliage, and the rising orange sun lit them up like fireflies. I had never been more appreciative of it. Looking back at the outer edge of the building, the grate was gone, along with any indication that it had been there at all. I wondered why it had appeared in my flat down there, why I had been the person to find it both times, and I remembered what Albert had said about the building altering those who stay. I pondered he was right, and if it was possible that it had altered me already. As we sat in the fresh morning air, I knew that none of it really mattered. Standing outside of a grim city tower block was cathartic. Gray concrete had never looked so inviting. We were home. The scenes of carnage and destruction that I had imagined would greet us when we entered the building were nowhere to be seen. Albert had certainly cleaned up. There was no kitten leg or creatures, or even evidence of a kerfuffle. It made me all the more nervous. I had no idea who had been hurt. The slow trudge to Ellie's floor was painful. My limbs all ached and the ringing in my ears continued. Still, I was just so glad to be getting her home. I couldn't wait to see Terry's face when we returned her daughter safely. Ellie may have looked a mess, but she was alive and well, which was the best I could ask for given the circumstances. I wish I could say that Terry greeted us with joy. I really do wish I could. Instead, her face was sullen, and the dark circles that sat like tattoos looked deeper than before. The skin around her eyes was puffed up and swollen with tears. When she spotted Ellie, she fell to her knees with relief. I hoped her face would brighten, but it didn't. "Where is he?" she sobbed, grabbing hold of Ellie and clutching her as tightly as she could. "Where's my son?" My heart dropped to my stomach. I'd made a sea of bad decisions in my time, but this, if this was what Albert had meant, was the worst consequence I could have imagined. I tried to find words, but I couldn't. I'd never seen a person look quite so broken. The pain in the screams of the mangled people wasn't a patch on Terry's sobbing. "Is that his blood?" she asked, gesturing to our clothes and hair while struggling to speak. I had been complacent. If the creatures had overpowered Eddie, if they had won, then maybe there wasn't enough of him left for Albert to see that he was like his sister. I shouldn't have written off the possibility like I had. Derek stepped forwards and put his hands on Terry's shoulders. She winced, and I remembered the lockdown situation, the only grounding in reality that I'd felt since returning to the upper layers of the block. She looked him in the eyes. "I don't know if you remember me, Terry. You were very small the last time we met, but I remember your parents." His kindly eyes had locked with hers as she melted and collapsed into him, wailing and gasping for air. Together we walked her to the sofa, not unlike how we had Essie not long before. I'd never known Terry's flat to be so quiet. Eddie was always playing, he was always so loud, and he always came home. Ellie was the absconder. It's why I'd found it easy to convince myself that Eddie was playing in his room, disrupting Terry's sleep like normal as we navigated the layers below. In all honesty, I think I was just trying to convince myself that I couldn't possibly be responsible for the death of a child. Logically, I always knew that with his sister gone for that long, he'd go looking. I just hoped. I really hoped we would get home in time, that he could hold his own. I don't know. Anything but this. I had buried my worries. Terry couldn't breathe properly through thick, heavy sobs. The noise muffled my already fucked-up ears. Derek sat with his arms around her while Ellie nuzzled into his other side, and I sat opposite, blood-soaked, devastated, and alone. Knock, knock, knock. The tapping on the door brought all conversation, sobbing and brooding, to a stop. Terry sprinted to the door, hope in her eyes, and as it opened, she wailed in joy. "Get off me, Mum! Where's Ellie?" The familiar voice of the young boy jolted me back into the room, and I turned to see Eddie, accompanied by none other than Mr. Prentice. Eddie spotted his sister on the sofa and ran towards the three of us. "Whoa, where did all the blood come from? Cool!" he shouted. There were a few cuts and bruises covering his limbs, but he seemed mostly unharmed. His excitement was enough to tell me that he was okay. Derek stared at him in disbelief, not unlike how he had Ellie upon their first meeting. I turned and walked towards the door, to where Terry and Mr. Prentice were speaking. Mr. Prentice wobbled slightly as he kept himself propped up with his cane. "What happened?" I asked. "I'm not sure. I heard a lot of banging and decided I should go and check what was going on. I found him at the bottom by that ghastly lift. I didn't recognize the man in the suit. I couldn't get close enough, but I don't understand how anyone could stand over an injured child and not help. He ran into the lift when I got closer, and you know how I like to avoid that place. I'm not sure why folk run from me sometimes, but it was probably for the best. I'm not sure what I'd have done." I imagined Mr. Prentice in his animal form running towards Albert. Imagining that the landlord had run scared from the beast warmed my heart. "Anyway, I'm rather tired, so if you don't..." Mr. P stopped as he caught a glimpse of the inside of the flat behind us. His eyes widened. "Is that Derek?" Derek came up behind us and reached out a bloodied hand to shake Mr. Prentice's. The elderly man looked unsteady on his cane, as if he had seen a ghost. "It's been years," he stuttered, beaming, firmly gripping Derek's intact hand. "We shall have to have a drink together, my friend." "We will," Derek smiled. "I'm back now. There'll be plenty of time to catch up." Terry clutched the twins tightly as the two men reveled in their meeting. I couldn't help but smile quietly to myself and think of Essie. The kids were safe, Derek was back, and Albert couldn't continue to terrorize the block. And yet again, Mr. Prentice had proved himself the real MVP. We left Terry and the kids to have some family time. Ellie hugged Derek so tightly as we left, I thought she might crush him. We walked back to the 7th floor where mine and Mr. P's flats were. It should have been a victory walk, but I couldn't shake the feeling that everything wasn't entirely over. My feeling was confirmed once the door to flat 48 closed behind Mr. Prentice, and Derek looked at me gravely. There's a few more things you need to know, Kat. Can you get cleaned up and meet me in the garden?" I'm the sole survivor of a roller coaster that couldn't be stopped for 12 hours. Last year I learned a lesson I will never forget. Trust your gut. I had the day off from work. I wanted to do something fun, but everyone I knew was busy. Makes sense. I mean, it was a Tuesday. I decided I'd just go to the amusement park by myself. I've done it before and had a great time. I'm a bit of a thrill seeker. Well, not too much anymore. Going 5 miles over the speed limit is about all the excitement I want out of life anymore. I got to the park at around 2 p.m. It was slow, even for a Tuesday. It gave me a sense of excitement because I knew I'd be able to ride a lot of rides without having to be there all day. At the same time, it gave me a weird, uncanny feeling. All this space and not enough people to fill it up. I ignored the feeling and moved on. I don't know about you, but whenever I go to an amusement park, I like to work my way up to the really crazy rides. I'll start small and finish off the day with my favorite. My favorite just happened to be called the Grim Reaper. It feels a little too on the nose, doesn't it? It was 7:30 p.m. and the park closed at 8 p.m. And I knew it was time to get in line for my final ride. I also made a new friend while there. We met standing in line at one of my first rides of the day. We decided after chatting the whole time in line that we'd hang out for the rest of the day. His name was Charlie. We agreed on every ride that day, except for the last. He wanted to end the night on the Mindbinder, but after some convincing, aka the Mindbinder's line was way shorter while passing by. We decided to do the Grim Reaper last, We got in line for the Grim Reaper, and there was hardly anyone in line. It made sense, given that it was almost closing time. "Do you think they will let us ride multiple times if the line stays down?" Charlie said with his hands clasped excitedly in front of him. I just smiled at him and chuckled. Normally, I would have been excited too, but something in my gut felt so off. For some reason, I didn't want to go on one of my favorite rides. Maybe it was the 5 corn dogs I ate a couple hours earlier, I figured. I'm a very rational person. I wasn't the kind of person to let anxiety or worry rule over me. I always thought life was just what you made of it. When we got in line, there were about 60 people, give or take. The people in front of us did their ride, and 30 of us were left in line. People started looking at the time and saying they were tired and just getting out of line. By the time it was our turn, only 19 people were in line. I knew the ride well enough to remember that it held 20 people. So if no one else got in line, they really might let us go multiple times. I really didn't want that, though. Honestly, I felt even more compelled to get out of line after all those others did too. And I didn't want to seem lame to my new friend if I wanted to get off the coaster after one ride. The time came for us to get on the ride. My heart was pounding faster than it ever had. I wondered if I was all worked up, because I watched Final Destination 3 with a friend a couple weeks back. But I wasn't having visions of the terrible fate we would all face. I was just feeling off. I did everything in my power to get it to all make sense and to not worry, but nothing worked. I seriously considered just telling Charlie I didn't feel great after the last ride, but I finally found someone with my taste in roller coasters. I didn't want to let him down. We were towards the back of the line, so we didn't have much say in where we sat. We ended up in the third car from the front. I was just happy we weren't in the front car. As you get on the Grim Reaper, it plays a cheesy little jingle. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The Grim Reaper will find you dead or alive. With music in the background that always sounded so dumb in the past, I couldn't believe it was getting to me. Charlie even hummed along to it while grabbing my arm with happiness. We got in our seats, and an employee came by and pulled down the metal bar restraint to secure us in our seats. It was the kind that strapped you individually over your shoulder. I'm on the chubbier side, but I can always fit into coaster seats. I've never been told I couldn't go on a ride. I'm just sometimes a little snug. It's actually kind of nice because I feel very secure. As we got strapped in, I felt the plastic-coated metal hit my shoulders and chest. It should have given me a sense of comfort and safety, but I just felt trapped. The employee walked back to the station that has the infamous big button that starts the ride. He flashed all a thumbs up and yelled, "Ready for the Reaper?" Everyone raised their hands and let out an excited scream, except for me. I let out a large sigh, counting down the seconds, trying to imagine Charlie and I once we were off the ride and how happy we would be. The employee hit the button, and we were off. The coaster shot out of the loading station like we were a bullet being shot out of a gun. After that, it started on a relatively slow ascent, up a point to a drop-off of 60 degrees, a couple of twists and turns, a big loop, and some more twists and turns. About halfway through the ride, I was enjoying myself. I was thinking about how the hard part was done, and I was safe. Just a little anxiety was all. We were rounding out our last bend when a sense of relief came over me. I could see the end of the ride. I was almost done. But the ride didn't start to slow down. Normally, the coaster starts to slowly come to a full stop several hundred feet from the end, but it was still going. As we passed by the loading area, I saw the operators look confused as we raced by. I noticed no one else was waiting in line. Someone screamed, "One more time," and everyone on board gave an excited response, everyone except for me. Charlie looked over at me and grabbed my wrist. "Yes! I knew they would let us keep going. This is awesome!" He let out an excited yelp as we reached the climb to the drop. He was beaming with joy the whole rest of the lap. We passed by the loading area once again, but this time the coaster operator had a couple other people standing with him. The operator who strapped us looked red and worried. As we were whipped by the employees for our third ride of the day, the other riders were divided. Some were still excited, screaming, "Let's go, one more time!" Orient, "Best day ever, yeah!" Some people started to sound scared. Not everyone noticed the employees looking frazzled. I can promise you one thing I noticed. We started going up the incline again. This was the slowest part of the ride, at around 10 miles per hour and slowing down a little as it reached its peak. This gave us opportunities to take a breath or try to talk, although it was only for a total of about 20 seconds. Are we stuck? I said nervously to Charlie. I'm sure we are fine. There's just a malfunction with the electrical system not activating the brakes or something. There is always a manual shutoff. He was cut off, and we went down the steep hill. We passed by yet again, this time with more people looking worried and someone standing close to where the coaster would go by. He tried to yell at us as we went by, but we couldn't really understand him. Maybe something about them working on getting us off. This time, as we zoomed by, everyone was scared and starting to panic. I guess it didn't sink in for some people what was happening until right now. We went around a fifth time and everything remained the same. On the sixth time, we were at the peak and saw a fire truck coming into the parking lot. From the top of the incline, we had a perfect view of the parking lot, along with the side of a highway a little further out. It took 2 more loops around the track by the time the fire department got to us. Not just them, but police officers and ambulances. It started to scare me. Why did they get ambulances? Is it just protocol or is there more to this? Someone came in a few minutes later with a big white board that they used to write messages to us. The ride was too loud when passing by them to hear anything, so this was their only way to talk to us. It must have been the 12th or 13th time around when the whiteboard read, "Trying to free you at peak." I knew they couldn't write a novel for us because you can only read so much while going by so fast, but come on, people, what is that supposed to mean? I think they just wanted to tell us they were working on a way to get us down, but that didn't matter. We had been on this ride for nearly 30 minutes, and we felt sick, and our bodies hurt like crazy. A couple loops after that, we saw a fire truck trying to get underneath where the top of the ascend was. Luckily, there was a large space where the truck could pull right beside it. Unfortunately, at its peak, it's about 200 feet in the air. It also didn't have any emergency exits at the top like most coasters do. You'd think that would be a requirement, but what do I know? We saw the fire truck start to expand the ladder that comes out the top, but it wasn't even close. We waited for the firefighters to try and figure out a solution to save us, as the audience below us was watching us like we were some kind of show. It was close to 45 minutes when the first death occurred, then one more soon after. There was a skinnier guy in a car behind me. I heard him talking about trying to slip out of the seat restraint, which secured him to his seat. The other guy he was with told him it was a bad idea. So did I. The next time we went up the ascent, he began violently wiggling and thrashing back and forth, to the point where people thought he was going to throw off the ride. He managed to wiggle about halfway out, right at the top. But, well, it didn't end very well. His leg got caught on a part of the track and yanked the rest of his body out of the bar restraint. It sent his body crashing down towards the earth. However, I think he was dead soon after he was ripped out of his seat. I didn't see too much of it, but the guy who was beside him let out an insane screech. Hearing that kind of agony as you are feeling the harsh effects of gravity hitting on your chest while going down a steep hill was truly mortifying. The screech out of nowhere stopped, and more people screamed. The man beside him had a heart attack. I could hear the symphony of moans and crying coming from the crowd watching us. I couldn't hear them before because of how loud the ride was, but they were terrified of what they saw. Police tried to escort them out of the park, but it didn't stop people from parking on the side of the road to watch and record on their phones. It made me feel disgusted. At around an hour on the ride, everyone stopped screaming or trying to talk to each other. It seemed like everyone accepted their fate. My nails were deeply embedded into Charlie's wrist. I couldn't scream anymore due to my throat feeling raw from the yelling. Even if I wanted to, I probably couldn't due to my voice giving out. I saw that I drew a little blood on Charlie, but he was too out of it to notice. He, along with a few other people, were incredibly sick. He threw up probably 5 times by this point and looked cross-eyed. Around that time, the electricity in the whole park shut down. All the lights, everything. I think they were hoping a hard reboot of the whole park would stop the ride. The coaster didn't just rely on gravity, but also on a lot of help from motors and other electronic elements. It all turned off when we were on the straightaway. Of course, it still didn't stop. I could hear someone yelling with frustration, not understanding how it could still be moving if it didn't have an electrical source. After 2 hours, they let some family members come into the loading area, which was a terrible idea. We were doing our best to keep cool and stay calm. Our families watching us, zooming by them every 2 minutes, and absolutely screaming at us made it so much worse. My mom was my first family member to show up. Don't get me wrong, I love my mom, but she is very stubborn and wanted something done even though they had already tried everything. Of course, it was just because she wanted me safe, but it was stressing me out. The firefighters put down a safety net underneath the ascent. It was still quite a jump if we could even get out successfully to land on it. And we might be okay, but we were all a little scarred from what happened before. It seemed like they put it out just in case someone tried to get out again. It didn't seem like it was the plan to have us all just jump out of that moving death machine. They weren't desperate enough at that point. We saw a large group of people passionately arguing and yelling at each other. From what I could tell, it was made up of family members, firefighters, and some employees of the park. I'm sure with lots of varying opinions. The ride was on hour 3. When the coaster entered the loading area once again, I saw a woman run over to the control panel. A couple people ran over to her and told her to stop and not press the button. She was screaming her head off and wailing. It had been hard to understand people in the past while going by them, but this was as clear as day. As we passed by, I could tell she was starting to break free from the grip of people holding her back. I wasn't too worried. Whatever button she was wanting to press, I'm sure it wouldn't work since none of the other ones worked so far. We were about 5 seconds away from going down the descent when we heard a click come from all our seats. The woman hit the button that unlocked all our overhead seatbelts. Of course, the seatbelt button worked, but not the button to stop the ride. A few people reacted fast enough to either jump out or snap it back over themselves before the ride went down. Others weren't so lucky. 3 people managed to jump out but didn't survive the fall, despite there now being a giant net to catch anyone who was dumb enough to try and get out that high. One person hit a support beam on the way down, and the other 2 landed wrong when they hit the net. Their bodies folded in an unnatural manner as they hit. All 3 died instantly. I would say around half of us that were left managed to get the seatbelt secured before going down the hill. Everyone else had to hold on for dear life. And unfortunately, I was one of them. I felt my stomach start to drop as I reached up to grab the only thing that would keep me from becoming a part of the pavement below. The restraint wasn't completely useless at this point. I just had a good 12 inches in between my chest and the restraint. As I dug my fingers into the plastic, I hoped I would be fine. Then the ride dropped. I felt my butt lift off the seat I had become so familiar with. I tried to wrap my ankles around the floor of the coaster to keep the rest of my body from flying out. Charlie luckily got the restraint down, so he was trying to get his leg over mine and hold me down with his arm. After the longest 5 seconds of my life, I managed to pull it back down over my chest. I wasn't sure who else got theirs down, but I assumed from how scared a few of them sounded, it wasn't good. All I could think about and look at was the big loop coming up. As we got closer, I could hear swearing from multiple passengers, including someone in front of me. She was violently pulling at the restraint, but it just wasn't budging. I was hoping and praying that the centrifugal force would keep her in her seat. As we went around the big loop, I closed my eyes. I knew I didn't want to see what was about to happen. I heard multiple people screaming and making horrendous cracking sounds. I don't have an exact number, but I would say only 7 people were left. I could see the 2 people in the very front row and Charlie beside me. I recall only hearing 3 other voices behind me at this point. At hour 5, 3 more people died while on the ride. 2 of them from a heart attack or something. The third person, well, he watched the person beside him suddenly die while going around one of the bends. He yelled out in anger, and well, I'd actually rather not go into detail. But he died soon after. I saw the whole thing. They were the 2 people left in front of me and Charlie. At hour 6, we saw a group of people bringing in what looked like another large net, except that it was in the loading area. The next time we looped around, they wrote something new on the big whiteboard. We are going to try and stop it manually. I had no clue what this meant, but by the look of the net, I was terrified. The next pass, there were people on both sides of the loading area. On one side, the net was wrapped around a large pole that had been somehow fastened into the concrete slab. I saw a large, similar pole on the other side, but the net wasn't yet attached. As we zoomed by, I could hear people trying to rush and hurry behind us. We went around one of the turns, and I cranked my neck, looking to see what plan they had in mind. They were frantically trying to tie the other side of the net to the support beam that was freshly drilled into the ground. I couldn't believe how stupid these people were. How on earth did they think this was a good idea? Was this a last-ditch attempt? I was yelling at them and telling them to stop, but of course they couldn't hear me. Even if they could, they wouldn't listen. They were desperate to get at least someone out of this alive. Or maybe the owner of the park wanted all of us to die so that no one could publicly talk about the horrific things we went through. As we went past the last bend, the hundreds of people watching the spectacle cheered, clapped, and celebrated. Somehow, not seeing any of the flaws with this terrible plan. We were on the straightaway and my heart started to pound again. The few seconds before we hit the net felt like slow motion. I swore I could see everyone's face. They looked happy. I couldn't believe it. It made me upset because I knew they were all about to be very disappointed. Finally, we hit the net. Of course, it was no match for a giant metal contraption hitting it. The metal pole was ripped out of the concrete slab and smashed down right in between our car and the one behind us. As we headed for the incline, we tried to get the net that attached itself to us off of the coaster. Luckily, we were able to get it off of us, but no luck with the metal beam that was now awkwardly lodged in the coaster. As we started going down, the whole ride started to shake violently. It felt like we were going to fly off the track. We made it to the first turn. I heard a loud snap and 2 screams. The 7 coaster cars behind ours broke off and the metal beam found its way underneath. As we turned, I watched in disbelief as the cars behind us all went flying off the tracks. At that point in the ride, it was about 50 feet off the ground, still enough to kill them. I wasn't fast enough to close my eyes and saw the whole thing. It went off the track like it had wings and suddenly plummeted down into the earth. The screaming immediately stopped when the ride landed upside down. My imagination filled in the blanks and shuddered at the thought of the carnage below me. And then there were 2. We were hoping that somehow the ride would stop or slow down because we lost the back 7 cars. I was not sure what the logic was, but we were desperate at this point. After another hour, it was not showing any signs of slowing down. Once we made it to hour 8, we expected our fate. I was hoping that this would all be over soon and we could just be done. I don't think either one of us thought we'd get off. We just hoped, at this point, that our deaths would be quick. Over the next couple hours, we noticed a piece of metal on the car ahead of us start to wobble and loosen. I'm not sure if it was just the wear and tear of the ride going for so long or the whole net fiasco. It kept looking like it was about to come loose, and we'd duck out of the way. We were imagining the worst possible outcome, thinking it would fly off and decapitate one of us. Eventually, it did come off. But it wasn't a dramatic moment like we thought it would be. It was so much worse. Instead of coming all the way off, it only partially came off and started grinding loudly against the track. We heard an audible cringing sound from everyone watching below. The sound was horrendous. The thin strip of metal started to find its way underneath the car. Charlie was worried it would dislodge the coaster from its tracks like we saw just hours before. He told me he was going to try and grab it. I begged him not to. After a few laps of me telling him to just leave it, he made up his mind and contorted his body to try and grab the sharp metal. I couldn't see his hand as he reached down for it, but I could see his face. Somehow, that made it worse. His expression quickly changed from focused to shocked in a matter of seconds. His face was blank. I heard screaming but had no clue what was going on. He lifted up his arm and I don't think I will ever be able to get the image of what used to be his arm out of my head. When he gripped the metal, it slipped and went deep into his forearm. I tried to grab his shoulder to calm him down, but to my shock, he was calm. He was more silent at that moment than he had been the whole day. He wouldn't even look at me. He was almost mesmerized by the sight of his bloody, disfigured arm. I felt lightheaded and had a ringing in my ears, watching the blood start to make its way down his entire body, then to me and the floor of the coaster. It was making me feel sick watching the blood move around the car as we went around the twists and turns of the ride. Within minutes, Charlie looked like a ghost. I did my best to try and wrap his arm up with shreds of my shirt, but it was completely pointless. I don't think an old t-shirt can help when you see the bone. I tried to talk to him. I tried to make him feel as comfortable as I could, but it was no use. He was fading in and out of consciousness. We began going up the ascent, and he finally looked over at me. I couldn't begin to explain all that I saw in his eyes. I could see the pain and sadness, but also the relief. He knew he was going to die. But I don't think he cared. He gave me a weak nod of the head and looked ahead when we went down the hill. I tried to keep a close eye on him this lap, but it was honestly hard to look at him. I heard him take a deep breath right before the loop. When we finished the loop, I looked over at him, and, well, he was gone. I was now left alone in the death trap. I never imagined it could have gotten any worse. But having a dead body sitting next to you on a roller coaster is not something I would recommend. I was sitting in shock next to my dead friend for a couple hours. I was frozen in fear, not wanting to even think of a way out. After gaining some courage, I contemplated my next move. I came back into reality and realized the coaster was going just slightly slower. It wasn't significant, but if the loops were taking just slightly longer than before, that damn piece of metal that killed Charlie must have made its way underneath and not derailed it but slowed it down. I ended up taking off my shoes and Charlie's shoes. I had a plan that was probably dumb, but if I died, at least it would be in my hands. As I went by the loading area, the coaster started to slow down just before the ascent. I threw all 4 shoes right in front of the ride. A part of a shoe caught the truck in just the right spot. The ride was still. I could feel the coaster almost pulsing, trying to move with all its might, and I was sore. My shoulders were badly buried by the shoulder restraints, repeatedly hitting me over and over again. My whole lower half aching from sitting in a hard seat for hours on hours. I took a deep breath and squeezed in my gut like I never had before. I let out a horrific yell as I forced my body out of the restraint that had been holding me down for the last 12 hours, about 360 times around the track. My heart was racing as I felt the coaster start to win the battle to move again. I managed to squeeze out just seconds before it took off. I was freed and jumped. Luckily, I just barely hit the net below. I also managed to hit the net, so I didn't hurt myself too badly. Nothing is worse than what that ride already did to me. I laid on the net, looking up into the sky. In disbelief, I was still. I wasn't moving. It was almost making me feel motion sick, not moving around. Like when you are reading a book in the car and you look up after an hour. Everything was blurry. I could barely hear the faint sound of people trying to get to me, but it was mostly just my ears ringing and my heart beating. After just a few minutes, I was down. They immediately rushed me to the ER where I stayed for 3 weeks. I sustained a broken rib, a broken collarbone, severe bruising, and a concussion, just to name a few, not to mention the mental trauma. I'm writing this as I'm feeling ready to finally tell my story. This is the first time I'm digging back into my memories and recollecting the whole experience. I've started to work through all this with a therapist, and it's made me realize I need to get it all out of my system. Don't bother trying to find anything about this story. The owners of the park have done a suspiciously good job hiding it. That's another reason I want to get my story out there. They have completely scrubbed the internet of it somehow. Although talking with a professional has helped, there are still some sounds and images that I can just never completely get out of my head. If you take one thing from my story, it's that you should trust yourself. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or gut instincts. If you have a feeling, trust it, please. It wasn't enough to wish for a daughter. I had to beg. There is a certain shop called Fleur in New York City, where magical objects can be purchased, rented, stored, or utilized, but only if you have extraordinary means and the right connections. It isn't the sort of place you can simply walk into. Customers can only gain entrance through referral, and all visits are by appointment only. I'm what you might call nouveau riche. No Vanderbilts or Astors populate my family tree, but I've done well for myself, and in the end, money is money. I manage a few important funds, and many of my clients have powerful ties that go back to the days of New Amsterdam. It was one such client that made an introduction for me at Fleur. There was no email or even a phone call, simply a red envelope that arrived with a white card inside, listing my name, an address in Manhattan, and an 8 p.m. appointment. The calligraphy was elegant and precise. It was August, hot, and the sun was just setting behind the tall buildings to the west. I arrived promptly, as I always do, to find a 3-story building built of brown bricks. 2 Grecian columns bordered a white door a few steps above street level, but the place was otherwise unpretentious, ordinary even. I knocked once and heard footsteps shuffling slowly toward the door, which soon opened to reveal a woman in her 50s dressed plainly in jeans and a loose-fitting white shirt. "You must be Tara," she said. "I'm Inga, the proprietress. Please follow me." I took a step inside, carefully closing the door behind me. Inside, the house was cozy and clean. I'd expected a crowded maze packed with objects. Instead, we passed an ordinary sitting room with threadbare couches and a kitchen with basic appliances and outdated tile countertops. "It's not what I expected," I said, knowing the words were rude even as they left my mouth. "When I was younger, I was vain," said Inge. She had a bit of a Midwest accent that made me want to discount anything she said. I had plenty of tools at my disposal, and I'd show up at that door glammed up to make men drool and women jealous. In the end, it brought me more trouble than joy. I should have listened to my father. He ran this place for decades before he handed me the keys. He always said it's best to hide in plain sight. Now I see the wisdom in that. For a moment, something in the periphery of my vision flickered, and in Inga's place I glanced a much taller, thinner woman in a glittering evening gown. Her red hair shimmered like it had been woven with strands of tinsel and fell halfway down her back. Black and green tattoos snaked down her arms. The inks moved slowly beneath her skin. As I followed her into an austere office, the flicker went away, and I saw the plain version of her again, smiling at me as if we now shared a secret. "So," she said, "I'm aware of your situation. I sympathize." "Do you have children?" I asked, and she shook her head. "I've never wanted them," she said. "It complicates this line of work. Certain clients see fit to threaten your family's safety if they can't get what they want. Things get quite ugly." She said this with an air of someone who'd crossed many dangerous people and come out on top. I thought it best not to inquire further. "I've tried all the normal methods," I said. "Hormones, IUI, IVF. I was trying not to betray any emotion, but I felt my chest constricting. I'd hate myself if I cried in front of this stranger. I just thought if maybe you had some kind of ointment, maybe, or a charm. Jesus, I can't believe I'm saying this out loud." She held out a hand, gesturing for me to do the same. Then she took hold of my wrist and spit in my open palm. I tried to draw it back, but her grip was far stronger than it should have been. She rubbed her thumb in small circles all around my skin until the spit was spread evenly. Then, finally, she released me and slowly nodded. "Unfortunately, none of the usual methods will work in your case," she said. "There's something blocking you." "Blocking me?" I tried not to sound too unduly skeptical. "Like a diaphragm?" I wanted to add, but I bit my tongue. "Yes, something powerful that even I can't quite see." Now I rolled my eyes. Of course, my bullshit meter was going into hyperdrive. I could almost sense that sales pitch coming. Of course, I had a 1 in a million problem that would require a very expensive solution, right? "Sounds like you can't help me then," I said, standing. "No," she said. "You can help yourself, but only if you want it badly enough." I hesitated for a moment. I could always try the IVF again. A new method was being pioneered down at the Mayo Clinic, something to do with treating the ovaries with stem cells maybe, but I could only imagine it ending in utter expensive failure. And then there was the other issue. Marlon, my boyfriend of 8 years, had thrown his hands up at the whole thing, frustrated at my tenacity, which he called obsession. A few days earlier, after our latest fight, he'd stormed out of the apartment without a word and hadn't responded to any of my texts since. "I can help you," she added. I sat down. "I want it more than you could possibly realize," I said. "Many people who show up here believe that," she said. "Some are correct, most aren't." She opened a door and rang a small bell. A few moments later, a thin, red-headed man walked in carrying a roll of fabric over his shoulder. "You don't need a salve to shock your womb into obedience," she said. "You need a wish." "Like from a genie?" I said, almost laughing. "You got Robin Williams' ghost in here?" She smiled thinly, as if humoring a child. "There are such things as beings who can grant boons to humans," she said, "but they don't live in lamps or rings, and they are closer to gods than to that blue monstrosity in Aladdin." She nodded to her companion, who knelt and rolled out the fabric. It was a rug, I realized, or what may have passed for one long ago. The gray fabric was beaten and frayed, and black, blocky images of antelopes had faded into almost nothing. "The rug is from the Ubaid period, roughly 4,800 BCE, explained Inga. "Even were it not charmed, it would be one of a kind, amongst the oldest textiles in existence. By the same token, it's likely that it had survived for so long precisely because of its supernatural qualities." I had to stop myself from making a joke about magic carpets. Inge looked deadly serious now. "In the popular imagination, magical objects are portrayed as easy fixes," said Inge. "A lamp you rub, or a sword that slices through stone. A carpet that flies. In reality, most enchanted objects can only be activated through extreme effort and determination. They're merely a foot in the door to seeking supernatural aid. The true effort comes from the seeker." "So how does it work?" I asked. "To contact the being tied to this rug, you must kneel on it for 3 days and nights. During that time you may not sleep, eat, or drink. If you have proven the strength of your resolve after 3 days, the spirit will visit you and your desire." "And I can wish for anything?" "Most wishes are acceptable, but it's good to know ahead of time that there are limits. You cannot use the wish to kill a living thing or to negate the wish of another. Such things are against the nature of the spirit. It is a generous being by nature, looking to grant the heart's desire of the worthy." "My wish is worthy," I said. She nodded. "You will need time to prepare," she said. "I have a room here that I'll set up for your trial. As I said, you will need to be here for 3 days. Come well nourished and hydrated, just after a full night's sleep. Wear loose, comfortable clothes." She paused. "Some clients choose to bring an adult diaper." "You've got to be fucking kidding me," I couldn't help but mutter, but she did not smile. "The cost is $5 million per day," she said, "non-refundable." I raised my eyebrows. "I was told money wouldn't be an issue," she said. "It's not," I said, regaining my composure. "I would have to sell some of my crypto holdings, the easiest asset to liquidate on short notice." I started to assess the tax implications in my head. "Good," she said. "Then we'll set a date." I was able to clear a few days in October for the trial. I told my coworkers I was headed to St. Bart's to do a little beach time. Though I hadn't taken a vacation in years, no one questioned it. If anything, they were glad, telling me it seemed like I could use it. I'd developed a reputation as highly intense, a ball buster. I think everyone was happy to get a break from me for a few days. I did finally hear from Marlon. He called to let me know he was coming for his things, and that he hoped I wouldn't be there when he arrived. It hurt to lose him, but I told myself I was better off moving forward alone. Perhaps I just didn't want to endure the embarrassment of explaining my visit to Fleur and the trial awaiting me. If anything, Marlon was even more of a skeptic than I was. But he wasn't the kind of person who really, truly wanted anything. He'd gone along with the baby plan partly because of me, and partly because it was the thing people did. But I know he never really fantasized about holding a newborn in his arms, taking joy in her little coos and laughs. He was simply along for the ride until things got too hard, and then he wasn't. It was all for the best. If the wish worked as promised, I wouldn't need Marlon or any man. The baby would be all mine. In the days leading up to the trial, I did everything I could to prepare. I caught up on sleep, ate at a small caloric surplus, and did a daily yoga routine to loosen my joints. Embarrassingly, I also prayed to a small statue of Mary my mother had given me as a girl. It was one of the few objects I'd kept from childhood, and I certainly wasn't Catholic anymore, but it felt like it wouldn't hurt. Finally, the day came. I arrived at Fleur and ascended the steps. The door opened before I could even knock, and Inga gestured for me to enter. She was dressed in a sort of white linen uniform with a tan apron. She might have looked at home in a day spa. Indeed, she handed me a glass of ice water with a cucumber floating inside. "It's important to hydrate, and best to empty your bladder before you go in," she said. Then, looking me in the eyes, she added, "Is your resolve as strong now as when we last met?" "Stronger," I said, honestly, and she nodded. I followed Inga up a winding staircase up to the 3rd level, where a narrow, dimly lit hallway opened to an array of doors. As we walked through the hall, it seemed I could hear groans coming from behind several of the door, strange muttering that sounded like prayer from others. "Busy morning?" I asked. "My client's business is strictly confidential," she said. "Should anyone come asking about you, I'd say the same." I wondered if it was all people kneeling on rugs behind every door. Surely not. Behind each door was a different object, a different aspiration. I had heard rumors of others who'd come here for help. A woman in her 50s who lay in a glass coffin that superheated her skin, crisping it like a Thanksgiving turkey's. The pain had been unimaginable, but after 2 hours when she emerged from the coffin, her skin was as taut as a 20-year-old's. Another friend had been asked to finger paint portrait after portrait of her dead lover in blood, until finally the 44th one began to move of its own volition and carried out a long and heartfelt conversation that left her happy for the first time in years. "Understood," I said. "Thank you." We reached a door near the end of the hall. She tapped the handle a few times in a kind of rhythmic sequence, then turned it slowly open. On the other side of the door was a barren room with no windows. 2 walls were of bare brick. The others were simple white, the paint chipping in places. At the center of the room stood the rug. It looked slightly more important now, set in the middle of the otherwise barren room, like an exhibit at a museum. I was struck by the feeling that I shouldn't touch it. "Your trial begins as soon as you place your feet on the rug," said Inga. "The spirit will expect you to kneel for the duration of your time here. A bit of stretching from time to time is acceptable, but under no circumstance are you to leave the rug. Should you wish to abandon the trial, simply walk to the door and knock thrice. No negative consequences will befall you, but you will still be expected to pay, and you will not be allowed to attempt the trial again." She paused for a moment. "I should have asked this before," she said. "But as I mentioned, there's some kind of blockage preventing you from having a child. Do you have enemies? Someone who would care enough to curse you?" I tried to think. I'd upset plenty of people in my life, especially at Word. I had ruined certain companies, effectively putting my boot on their necks when they showed the first signs of weakness. I'd sparked selling frenzies that tanked stock prices and ruined small financial empires. An angry tech bro had once pelted me with a milkshake as I left the office. "I don't think any of my enemies believe in this stuff," I said, and she nodded. "Good," she said. "The trial begins now." She walked outside, closing the door behind her. And though I was now the only person in the room, I didn't feel alone at all. The rug had a presence to it, I realized, just not necessarily a human one. Slowly, I removed my heels and circled the rug. The floor was frigid against my bare feet, cold enough to be uncomfortable, yet I found it difficult to will myself to step onto the fabric. Finally, I shook my head. I was being stupid. I would get on the rug. I had never shied away from anything simply because it was hard. This time would be no different. The first few minutes were unremarkable. I knelt on the old fabric and stared blankly at the wall. Years of classes, yoga, barre, Pilates, etc., had trained me for this moment. If anything, when I closed my eyes, I could pretend that I was simply holding child's pose for a bit longer than usual, and that I'd soon be hitting the shower and indulging in a green smoothie. As time wore on, it became harder to maintain this fantasy. My muscles began to ache, and I shifted to other sorts of kneeling. Sometimes with my torso elevated, sometimes lying forward and touching the rug with my fingertips. Initially, the rug had seemed to possess no smell, and I imagined it had dissipated over the course of millennia. Now, though, with my mind emptied and my senses heightened, I caught notes of odd scents, a kind of burnt one emanating from the black dye, and a musky, earthen one from the fabric itself. Did they have sheep back in the olden days of the Fertile Crescent, or had this been woven from the hair of some other animal? The pain became worse. My lower back and knees throbbed. How long had I been kneeling now? Surely not more than a few hours? Was I really ready to endure this for days? I'm going to stand and stretch now, I said, feeling like an idiot. I hope that's okay. That doesn't break the rules, right? There was no response, and I felt extra stupid. Okay, I asked one last time. Looking up, I seemed to spy a haze of something at the far end of the room near the wall in front of me. An old woman was sitting in a chair, knitting. For a moment, she looked up from her work and met my eye. Then she slowly nodded, giving me permission. Carefully unbending my knees, I stood. The relief was immediate. The fire that had been burning in my joints went out as if doused with a bucket of water. "This is still the easy part," said the old woman quietly from the far side of the room. "If you don't have the will to continue, better to quit now. There's no prize for quitting halfway or even at the 3/4 mark." "You've never met anyone with a will like mine," I said. She snorted a little and went back to her knitting. "Kneel," she said quietly, and then she disappeared. The pain grew worse, and if it was just pain, it might have been easy. But your mind plays tricks on you when you hurt. It'll tell you that you're doing permanent injury to your knees and ankles. It'll ask if the tingling sensation in your toes is nerve damage. Could your spine itself be in jeopardy? Will you still be able to walk at the end of all this? But through all of it, I didn't stop kneeling. Every time an intrusive thought arose, I made myself think of my daughter. At times, it was almost as if I could see her. In the vision, though, she wasn't a baby, but a woman fully grown, perhaps even my same age. She stood behind the old woman, a hand on her shoulder. She stared at me as if looking for something, perhaps wondering if I'd soon give up, if she'd never come to exist. This wasn't the first time I'd seen my daughter. Since I was a teenager, I've had vivid dreams about her. Us at high tea and matching dresses arguing the merits of English breakfast and Earl Grey. Me at her college graduation, my eyes welling with tears as she collects her Princeton diploma. Me popping a bottle of champagne to celebrate her putting the down payment on her first apartment, a little one-bedroom in Brooklyn. It was all so clear that it seemed inevitable, like the dreams were a reality just waiting for me once I reached the proper time. I knew I was destined to become the mom that my own mother never was. Yes, my mother was a disaster. She'd moved to New York from rural Virginia, assuming she'd be discovered by some producer at the cafe where she worked and book her ticket to Broadway. Every morning she spent an hour in the mirror preparing for her big break, but it never came. Instead, there was only an endless procession of men, some with promises of fame and fortune, but mostly just a string of losers that grew increasingly dangerous. I don't like to talk much about that period of my life, except to say that it was terrible and not something I'd wish on anyone. It all ended when I was 12 and came home from school to find her half dead off a bag of gray powder lying on the couch beside her fully dead boyfriend. I went to live with one of her cousins in Brooklyn after that. She had 2 daughters of her own and worked almost constantly. To her credit, I wasn't treated any worse than her biological children. But that's not saying much. At best, we were all seen as burdens. But at least I was safe. I suppose it made me tough and eager to be nothing like my mother. I grew up hating her and had very little contact with her once I stopped living at her place. At some point, I heard that she died falling from a balcony, an act that may have been self-inflicted or at the hands of a jealous boyfriend, though the truth was never discovered. I chose not to attend the funeral. I suppose I was driven to be my mother's opposite in every way. Through high school, my grades were perfect, and I never dated. I told myself that when I was older, I would give my daughter the things I never had. a clean apartment looking over the park, and I stable dad who never drank and woke up early each morning to brew coffee and read the news. A mother who loved her above all other things. I looked up at the old woman. My daughter's shade stooped down and whispered something in her ear. "What?" I asked, attempting to bend my head up to look at them. I realized I barely had the strength to do so. How long had I been here now? I had no phone, no watch. The room had no windows. It could have been the first day or the second. Certainly not the third. "She says that you could never love her above all other things," the old woman muttered. "You love yourself too much." Had they read my thoughts? "What does she know?" I asked. "She doesn't know me. She's not even real." My daughter crossed her arms and stared daggers. I should mention that not all of my dreams about my daughter had been good ones. There had been nightmares too. Me arriving home to find her, 16 and in bed with an older boyfriend. Me screaming and hitting her over and over again, shouting that she'd end up like my mom. And more like this, my daughter coming home with a B+ on a report card, or missing curfew by half an hour as a junior in high school. It always ended with me screaming, reminding her that a single step on the path to failure was one too many. I would wake from these dreams full of anger at her, incredulous that my imagined daughter could betray me in such a way. At some point, my right knee gave out. I wasn't sure if the joint had ruptured permanently or if it just needed some rest, but there was physically no way I could make it hold position. I collapsed face first onto the rug and looked up at the old woman as if to ask if this was acceptable. She nodded almost imperceptibly. At some point that I had soiled myself. Not quite sure what to do, I removed the stained pants and underwear and tossed them to the side of the room. Then, for whatever reason, I removed my shirt as well, throwing it after the others. I lay curled in a naked ball, looking weakly up at the old woman who kept busy with her knitting. "How long?" I asked, but she didn't answer. Beside her, my daughter never took her eyes off me. She was smirking just a bit, reveling in my pain. She was the bad girl, the one I'd seen in my dreams. She would disobey me. I would come home from work to find her in a cloud of pot smoke listening to an old Nirvana album, and I would rip the buds from her ears and smash them underfoot, over and over again until they were plastic dust. "Give up," she mouthed. "Never," I tried to say, but my lips were chapped and bleeding, and the words caught in my throat. I knew then that I would amend my wish. I would wish for a good daughter, not her, not the brat looking down at me from the old woman's side. I tried to give voice to these thoughts, to shout them at my daughter, and found I could not. For the first time I felt a pang of true fear. Not that I would give up, but that I would die here, naked on this rug before I had a chance to make my wish. There had been no promise that I would live. How long could the body go without water? I would have drunk from a gutter or a horse trough were it in front of me, anything. Shadows were dancing all around the room, a great revel, all ready to carry me off to somewhere dark and permanent. I knew I could make them go away. I could roll off the rug, crawl to the door, beg to be let out, but I would not. I would never, never relent. My daughter shook her head. "See," she said, "she'll never bend." The old woman looked up at me and nodded, and I realized that the rug had extended now, growing longer. It reached all the way to the old woman, stretching out to her feet and up her legs, all the way to the needles in her lap that were knitting it longer and longer. She gestured for me to come closer, and I began to crawl, naked and chapped. My right knee fully numb, I dragged myself to her feet. "Tell me what you desire," she said softly, not meeting my eyes. "You know," I said. "You need to say it." "A daughter," I said. "My perfect daughter." She thought for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. "I cannot help you. The rules are the rules." "What are you talking about?" I choked as I asked the question, my throat dry and painful. "Your wish cannot negate the wish of another," she said softly. "I don't understand," I said. What was she talking about? The woman held up the bits of yarns in her lap. They seemed to vibrate. the dancing threads throwing darkness on the wall like shadow puppets. In these shadows a vision formed. It was my daughter years in the future, my same age. She was here in this very room, kneeling on this very same rug. Time moved in fast motion as I watched her suffer just as I had, her body breaking down, her mind drying into a husk as the lack of sleep and water broke it. But in the end, she too survived the trial. She too crawled to the old woman to make her wish. "I don't want to die," she said through chapped lips, "but I wish I was never born. Could you do that for me?" The old woman looked up at her curiously. "Perhaps. Why is this your wish?" "Because I have never been happy, not one day in my life," my daughter said, blinking away tears. "I had a mother who screamed at me for the slightest misstep. She demanded perfection, and I tried to give it to her. I gave her everything she wanted. I went to Yale, then Harvard Medical School. There's no better doctor in the city. But every day I come home and wish I'd die in my sleep. I haven't spoken to my mom in years, but I still hear her screaming. The second I start to feel happy, she's right there in my ear, telling me I don't deserve an ounce of joy in my life." The old woman nodded. "I can give you what you wish," she said. "Wait," said my daughter. "If you grant the wish, what happens?" The old woman gestured to the work in her lap. "It would be a bit of bother," she said. "I'd have to unravel this a bit." She gestured to the yarn in her lap, still attached to the rug. 38 years worth of work back to the time of your conception. I'd nudge things just a little bit. A different baby would fill her belly." "No," said my daughter, fighting back tears. "No, no, no. No one else should have to do this. To live this." She thought for a moment, then said, "I want to wish for my mother to be barren, incapable of having a child ever." The old woman smiled a bit sadly and nodded. She began to pull at the thread in her lap, unraveling the rug. "Anything else?" "Yes," said my daughter. "One day, I want her to find out why." The old woman looked over at me now, then over at my daughter's specter. She shot me one last cruel smile, a look of satisfaction. Then she turned and walked through the darkness of the wall. She would not return. "Do you understand?" asked the old woman. "I can't allow your wish to undo hers." "I understand." "Is there anything else I can offer you?" she asked. I shook my head. She looked up from her knitting one last time. "You may yet think of something," she said. "Come back any time. You know where to find me." Ing must have entered the room shortly after. She gave me a glass of water, which I drank desperately, and a fresh robe. She took me to a shower, where I sat and cried on the wet floor. My skin was so broken that I could barely handle the lukewarm temperature. My knee throbbed but had regained a bit of its function. I saw that I would be whole again, physically at least. Since that day, I've been at home, slowly repairing myself. Long baths, lunches of chicken broth and juice cut with water. But I can't bring myself to call work or anyone, really. I feel that the motor has been ripped out of me, that there's nothing to make me go anymore. What is a life without a purpose? I am not someone accustomed to drifting. And of course I've been angry, at my daughter and at myself. But there's nowhere for those feelings to go, nothing to do with them. I can't undo the mother I was in some other fabric of reality. I am stuck, but at the same time I have no desire to die. And lately my thoughts have turned to my own mother, who I suppose made me this way. As I said before, so much of who I am came as a reaction to who she was. I think of the way she cackled when she was high. It was a selfish laugh, a laugh you couldn't share. Late at night, I find myself waking impossibly thirsty, but I do not drink. Instead, I kneel on the bed and stare into the darkness, and I think I see the old woman sitting there. I imagine crawling to her and whispering that I too wish my mother had been barren, that I too want her to know why. I imagine the old woman unraveling another few decades from her work to go back and fix things. And in my reverie, I sometimes hope that I won't be the last one to make this wish, that my mother will do the same, wishing her mother barren, and then on and on, until each bad mother through the centuries is erased along with history itself, the whole rug disappearing as the old woman pulls the thread until all traces of humanity are wiped away, leaving nothing but a pile of tangled yarn. As far as missing persons go, I'd say about half the calls I get are related to that. The others are rescue calls, people who fall down cliffs and hurt themselves, get injured by fire. You wouldn't believe how often this happens, mostly drunk kids. Get bitten or stung by animals or insects. We're a tight team, and we have veterans who are excellent at finding signs of lost people. That's what makes these cases where we never find any trace of them so frustrating. One in particular was upsetting for all of us, because we did find a trace of them, but it just led to more questions than answers. An older man had been hiking alone on a well-established trail, but his wife called to say that he hadn't come home when he should have. Apparently he had a history of seizures, and she was worried that he hadn't taken his medication and had suffered one out on the trail. Before you ask, I have no idea why he thought it was okay to go out alone, or why she didn't go with him. I don't ask about that kind of thing because past a certain point it really doesn't matter. Someone is missing, and it's my job to find them. We went out in a standard search formation, and it wasn't long before one of our vets found signs that the guy had gone off the trail. We grouped up and followed him, spreading out in a fan to make sure we were covering as much ground as possible. Suddenly, a call comes over the radio telling us to all head back to the vet's location, and we come right away, because this usually means the missing person is injured, and we need a full team to help get them out safely. We meet back up, and the vet is just standing at the base of a tree with his hands on the sides of his head. I ask my buddy what's going on, and he points up into the branches of this tree. I almost couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there's a walking stick dangling from a branch at least 30 feet off the ground. The little strap thing on the handle has been looped around the branch, and it's just hanging there. There's no way the guy could have tossed it up that far, and we don't see any other signs that he's still in the area. We call up into the tree, but it's obvious no one's in it. We're all just sort of left scratching our heads. We keep searching for the guy, but we never find him. We even bring our canines out, but they lose his scent long before this tree. Eventually, the search is called off because there are other calls we have to attend to, and past a certain point, there's not much we can do. The guy's wife called us every day for months, asking if we'd found her husband, and it was heartbreaking to hear her get more and more hopeless each time. I'm not sure why this call in particular was so upsetting, but I think it was just the sheer improbability of it. That and the questions that were raised. How the hell had this guy's cane ended up there? Did someone kill him and toss that up there as some weird trophy? We did our best to find him, but it was almost like a taunt. We still talk about that one from time to time. One of my first jobs as a trainee was a search op for a 4-year-old kid that had gotten separated from his mom. This was one of those cases where we knew we were going to find him because the dogs were on a strong scent trail, and we saw clear signs that he was in the area. We ended up finding him in a berry patch about half a mile from where he'd been last seen. Kid wasn't even aware that he'd wandered that far. One of the vets brought him back, which I was glad for because I'm really not good with kids, and I find it hard to talk to them and keep them company. As my trainer and I are headed back, she decides to take me on a detour to show me one of the hot spots where we tend to find missing people. It's a natural dip in the land near a popular trail, and people will usually move downhill because it's easier. We hike out there, it's a few miles away, and we get there in about an hour or so. As we're walking around the area and she's pointing out places she's found people in the past, I see something in the distance. Now this area we're in is about 8 miles from the main parking area, though there's back roads you can take to get closer if you don't want to hike that far. But we're on state-protected land, which means there can't be any kind of commercial or residential development out here. The most you'll ever see is a fire tower or makeshift shelter that homeless people think they can get away with building. But I can see from here that whatever this thing is has straight edges, and if there's one thing you learn quickly, it's that nature rarely makes straight lines. I point it out, but she doesn't say anything. She just hangs back and lets me wander over and check it out. I get within about 20 feet of it, and all the hair on the back of my neck stands up. It's a staircase in the middle of the fucking woods. In the proper context, it would literally be the most benign thing ever. It's just a normal staircase with beige carpet and about 10 steps tall. But instead of being in a house where it obviously should be, it's out here in the middle of the woods. The sides aren't carpeted, obviously, and I can see the wood it's made of. It's almost like a video game glitch, where the house has failed to load completely and the stairs are the only thing visible. I stand there, and it's like my brain is working overtime to try and make sense of what I'm seeing. My trainer comes and stands next to me, and she just stands there casually, looking at it as if it's the least interesting thing in the world. I ask her what the fuck this thing is doing here, and she just chuckles. Get used to it, rookie. You're gonna see a lot of them. I start to move closer, but she grabs my arm, hard. I wouldn't do that, she says. Her voice is casual, but her grip is tight, and I just stand there looking at her. You're gonna see them all the time, but don't go near them, don't touch them, don't go up them. Just ignore them. I start to ask her about it, but something in the way she's looking at me tells me that it's best if I don't. We end up moving on, and the subject doesn't come up again for the rest of my training. She was right, though. I'd say about every fifth call I go on, I end up running across a set of stairs. Sometimes they're relatively close to the path, maybe within 2 or 3 miles. Sometimes they're 20, 30 miles out, literally in the middle of nowhere, and I only find them during the broadest searches or training weekends. They're usually in good condition, but sometimes it looks like they've been out there for miles. All different kinds, all different sizes. The biggest I ever saw looked like they came out of a turn-of-the-century mansion and were at least 10 feet wide, with steps leading up at least 15 or 20 feet. I've tried talking about it with people, but they just give me the same response my trainer did. It's normal. Don't worry about it. They're not a big deal, but don't go close to them or up them. When trainees ask me about it now, I give them the same response. I don't really know what else to tell them. I'm really hoping someday I get a better answer, but it hasn't happened yet. This is another one that was less spooky and more sad. A young man went missing late in winter, when realistically no one should be going that far out onto the trails. We close a lot of them, but some remain open year-round, unless there's a shitload of snow. We did an op for him, but we had about 6 feet of snow on the ground. It was an unusually heavy snow year, and we knew it wasn't likely that we'd find him until spring when the thaw came. Sure enough, when the first big thaw came, a hiker reported a body a little ways off the main trail. We found him at the base of a tree in a pile of melted snow. I knew right away what had happened, and it scared the living shit out of me. Most of you who ski or snowboard or spend any amount of time on a mountain will probably have guessed too. When snow falls, it doesn't collect as thick in the areas beneath the branches. It happens most with fir trees because they have a sort of closed umbrella shape. So what you end up with is a space around the base of a tree that's filled with a mixture of loose, powdery snow, air, and branches. They're called tree wells, and they're not immediately obvious if you don't know what you're looking for. We put up signs in the welcome center, big ones, letting people know how dangerous they are. But every year that we get an unusual amount of snow, at least one person doesn't read them or doesn't take the warning seriously, and we find out about it in spring. My best guess is that this young man was hiking and got tired, or maybe a cramp from walking in the deep snow. He went to go sit at the base of the tree, not knowing that there was a tree well, and fell in. He got stuck with his feet up, and the surrounding snow caved in around him. Unable to free himself, he suffocated. It's called snow immersion suffocation, and it doesn't usually happen except in really deep snow. But if you get stuck in a weird position like this guy did, even 6 feet of snow can be lethal. What scared me the most was imagining how he must have struggled. Upside down, in the freezing cold, he didn't die quickly. The snow would have formed a dense, heavy pile on top of him, and it would have been literally impossible to get out. As it got harder to breathe, he would have known what was happening. I can't even imagine what he was thinking in his last moments. A lot of my less outdoorsy friends want to know if I've ever seen the goat man while I've been out on calls. Unfortunately, or I guess fortunately, I've never had anything quite like that happen. I guess the closest was the whole black-eyed man thing, but I didn't see anything. However, There was one call where I had something kind of similar happen, but I'm not sure I'm willing to chalk it up to the goat man. We'd gotten a report that an older woman had fainted along one of the trails and needed assistance getting back down to the main area. We hike up to where she's at, and her husband is just beside himself. He runs, well, I guess more jogs to us, and tells us that he was a little ways off the trail looking at something when his wife starts screaming behind him. He runs back to her and she's passed out on the trail. We get her on a backboard, and as we're getting her down to the welcome center, she comes to and starts screaming again. I calm her down and ask her what happened. I can't remember verbatim what she said, but essentially, what happened was this. She'd been waiting for her husband when she started hearing this really strange sound. She said it sounded sort of like a cat, but it was off somehow, and she couldn't quite figure out why. She went a little ahead to try and hear it better, and it sounded like it was coming closer. She said the closer it got, the more uneasy she was, until she finally figured out what was wrong. I do remember this next part, because it was so weird that I don't think I could forget it if I tried. It wasn't a cat. It was a man saying the word meow over and over. Just meow, meow, meow. But it wasn't a man. It couldn't have been, because I've never heard a man make his voice buzz like that. I thought my hearing aid was going out, but it wasn't. I adjusted it, and it still sounded all buzzy. It was awful. He was coming closer, but I couldn't see him. And the closer he got, the more scared I was. And the last thing I remember was a shape coming out of the trees. I guess that's when I fainted. Now, obviously, I'm a little perplexed as to why a guy would be out in the fucking woods chanting meow meow at people. So once we get down the mountain, I tell my superior that I'm gonna go search the area to see if I can find anything. He gives me the go-ahead, and I grab a radio and hike back to where she fainted. I don't see anyone, so I keep going about a mile more, and when I head back, I go off the trail to see if I can figure out where she saw him coming from. It's almost sunset by this point, and I don't have any desire to be out at night alone, so I just sort of write it off and make a mental note to check it out again tomorrow. But as I'm headed back, I start to hear something in the distance. I stop, and I call out for anyone in the immediate area to identify themselves. The sound didn't come closer or get louder, but it sounded exactly like a man saying, meow meow in this really odd monotone. As comical as it makes it sound, it was almost like that guy on South Park with the electrolarynx Ned. I go off the trail in the direction I think it's coming from, but I never seem to get closer. It's almost like it's coming from all directions. Eventually, it just sort of fades out, and I ended up going back to the welcome center. I didn't get any further reports like that, and even though I went back to that area, I never heard that exact sound again. I suppose it could have been some stupid kid out there fucking with people, but even I have to admit it was weird. The first she told me in response to my asking about her most traumatic calls. She shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential for nasty accidents is higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said, one of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple of days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They'd warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course there's always those who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials, and he took them out into an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best KD could figure, they'd walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid, but actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on the rocks at the bottom, and the parents died instantly. One of the kids did as well, but the other two survived. One had a broken leg and fractured ribs, the other was almost unharmed save for some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. KD said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before a storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try and get warm, or maybe just to rest, and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one to find the kid who'd frozen to death looking for help. She said it had started to snow, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described in detail how, as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse in. The kid was sitting upright, with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at his face, she saw that he'd died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me, repeatedly, that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. The other traumatic story she told me that stood out in my mind was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he'd never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area, and KD started seeing blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't sure exactly what body part it had come from, but the farther she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and tissue trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, and she finds the climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she'd ever seen before. He was lying face down, one arm stretched in front of him, as if he'd died crawling. She looks closer and sees that he's been partially disemboweled, which is where the tissue she'd seen had come from. The guy has an ice pick tucked into a hip holster, and it's covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be sure exactly what happened, but she said, as best she can figure, this is what went down. The guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He'd probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he'd gotten impaled by the axe, and it had disemboweled him. He drug himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under the cliff face. She isn't terribly bothered by gore, but I guess a few of the guys who came to help her remove the body threw up when they turned him over, and a good portion of his intestines spilled out. I mentioned to her that I was interested in hearing about any experiences she had with people completely disappearing. Her eyes light up, and she leans in close to me. "Want to hear a real doozy?" she asks. She tells me about how, when she first started, there was a case that got a lot of attention in the media. A family had been out berry picking in an area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another of those cases where it's like, the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward to 6 months later. The family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that's been set up there for the kid. They bring their other son. While they're placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time, he vanishes into thin air. Now, obviously, the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose one child, but to lose 2 is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the largest in state history. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park, looking for the kid. But again, there's no trace of him. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park he vanished from. And then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer almost 15 miles from the designated search area radios in that he's found the kid. They assume that the kid was dead, but the volunteer says he's not only alive, he's in good shape. KD and her team go out to recover the kid, and when they get there, she can't believe that this is the kid that's been missing. His clothes are clean, there's no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear traumatized. The volunteer says he found the kid sitting on a log, playing with a little twig bundle that's bound together with some old rope. KD asks him where he's been, who he was with for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the fuzzy man. Now, KD firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid says no, he wasn't hairy. He was a fuzzy man, and he describes a man that's blurry, like when you close your eyes but not all the way closed. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid with him deep into the woods. The kid says he slept in a hollow tree, and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. KD asks if the man was mean, if he scared the kid, and the kid says no, he wasn't scary. But I didn't like how he didn't have eyes. KD says they get the kid back to headquarters, and a cop takes him into town to talk to him more about what happened. She's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she said the kid described being kept in this tree by the fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud, even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their heads, and the search for his brother is renewed with no results. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never find him. The last story that KD told me was of something that happened to her when she got separated from her training group when she was a rookie. They were learning the basics of high-elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 50 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. I'll tell the rest exactly as she told it to me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize that I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't a, oh, I got turned around, lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. If you'd asked me, I don't even think I'd have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do. So I stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where the fuck I was and what I was supposed to do. But the longer I stand there, the more confused and turned around I get, so I started walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. And as I'm walking, it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow, and then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head almost, like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky. And it's telling me over and over, it's okay, you just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay, just keep walking and find something to eat. Eat. So I start looking around for anything that I can eat, and I swear to God I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was bottomless, and I think I'd have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time, so I had no idea how long I'd been out when I hear an actual voice coming toward me. I go toward it and see one of the other SARs, and he looks fucking terrified. He's running toward me asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, as he's running toward me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not even really thinking about what I'm doing, but what I am thinking is that I have to eat. If I don't eat, I'll never be okay again, so I just have to eat. He sees me doing that, and he backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away, that he's not going to hurt me, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put the knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for half an hour or so. But he tells me I've been gone for 2 fucking days. I've gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain, and if I'd kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 miles of wilderness. They'd never have found me. He can't believe I'm not dead, and of course, I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time has passed at all. I don't say anything, I just go back with him to a rendezvous point, and I'm taken back to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out what happened. As best they can guess, I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia, or a weird seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again, but I'll tell you, Ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when I have to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 fucking days on a freezing mountain. EW. The next person I talked to was EW, a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops like this to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He specialized in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have a sixth sense when it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the more senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening, and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual. But when we got on the subject of our weirder calls, I mentioned that I'd had a buddy who'd gone up a set of stairs. He got kind of quiet and asked me if I'd heard of a little boy who'd disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me this story. Cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case and a couple others just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. Before we went our separate ways, he put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me really close. He tells me that there's bad things out here, things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't have a chance to talk with him again, but that story stuck with me. PB. By pure coincidence, I got to talk to another vet, PB, who's been in the SAR field for years. We were partnered on a grid sweep during a training exercise, and we were chatting casually about how we liked the job, what kinds of things we'd seen, and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout given the area that we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs and that I wished I knew more about them. He got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never ever supposed to do, but I did it, and he did the same. The sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left.